Chapter 856. Dumpling nodded. Then she gently pricked her other paw with her claws, and a drop of dark red blood immediately gushed out. Then the drop of blood slowly floated up. Chu Liyue reached out her hand, and the drop of blood quietly floated in the center of her palm. Upon closer inspection, it was faintly suffused with a layer of colorful light. A vast and mighty aura emanated from it. This was the divine beast blood of the red-tailed red phoenix. Shengguan and Zuomingshi both looked at the two items in Chu Liyue's hands with shock and anticipation. This was the only one in the entire Tianling dynasty. Many people might not be able to see it with their own eyes in their entire lives. However, it had appeared before their eyes just like that. Chu Liyue's card box, Zuomingshi. Master Zhuo, this should be enough, right? It's enough, it's enough. Zuomingshi came back to his senses and nodded repeatedly, unable to hide his excitement. As a celestial physician, he was already extremely happy to see such a rare treasure in the world. Now that he could personally boil it into a decoction, this was an even rarer opportunity. With these, I believe that Her Majesty's health will definitely improve as soon as possible. Chu Liyue nodded in satisfaction and handed over the wooden box and the drop of blood. Zuomingshi carefully took it. For safety's sake, he took out his own medicine cauldron and began refining. A ball of orange flame burned in the medicine cauldron. Zuomingshi threw in a few medicinal herbs one after another. When the refinement was almost complete, he cautiously threw in the dancing lotus. The clear and beautiful petals quickly curled up and then slowly melted, condensing into a snow-white water droplet. At first glance it looked like a small snowball. Finally, Zuomingshi put in Dumpling's blood. The two water droplets began to slowly merge. After about 15 minutes, all the medicinal herbs in the medicine cauldron had completely merged. Because they weren't refining pills, it didn't cause too much of a commotion. However, the ball of decoction floating in the medicine cauldron emitted a faint aura. He was not to be underestimated. Zuomingshi's body was almost drenched in sweat, and his lips were slightly pale. It could be seen that in this short period of time, he had consumed a lot of energy. Whether it was the divine beast's blood or the dancing lotus, they both contained extremely powerful energy. It was indeed not an easy task to harmonize the medicinal properties to the best possible level. In the end, Zuomingshi waved his sleeve and poured the medicine into a jade bowl. Shengguan stood at the side, staring at the bowl of medicinal soup, ready to make a move. If the decoction could be used on myself, not only would her strength be greatly improved, even the scars on her face might be completely healed. Thinking of this, the desire in her heart grew even stronger. Unfortunately, there was only one dancing lotus and he had used it all just now. But the blood of a mythical beast. Wasn't Chu Liyue's red-tailed red phoenix still there? Your Highness. Zuomingshi handed over the bowl of medicinal soup. Would you please feed it to His Majesty? Shengguan lowered her eyes to take a look, and only then did she regain her senses. She nodded and took the bowl. Taking a step forward, she lifted the muslin curtain and sat by the bed. Chu Liyue looked up, wanting to see Imperial Father's face. Unfortunately, Shengguan blocked her view, so she couldn't see clearly. Her heart trembled slightly, but she still withdrew her gaze, hiding the longing and worry in her eyes. With this medicine, Imperial Father's body should be able to improve greatly. The reason why she had purposely released the news and insisted on watching with her own eyes was to ensure that Imperial Father would be safe. Now she could finally relax a little. On the other side, after Shengguan fed a few mouthfuls of the medicine, she turned back to look at the two. This consort will take care of things here. You can leave first. Zuomingshi responded and was about to leave, but Chu Liyue said with a faint smile, Today, I don't have any urgent matters to attend to. Anyway, I don't have anything important to do today, so I'll just stay here and see how His Majesty is doing after taking the medicine. After all, it came from me. If I leave now and something happens in the future, I really won't be able to explain myself. Third Princess, don't you think so? Hearing this, Zuomingshi, who was just about to leave, stopped. That's right. He was the one who refined this medicine. What if something happened? Then this humble subject will also wait here? Zuomingshi said tentatively, then stood to the side. Shengguan was furious. She had originally wanted to send the two of them away so that she could take the remaining half of the medicine for herself. But now it seemed that she couldn't. Under the gazes of the two, Shengguan could only obediently feed the rest of the medicine to Imperial Father. Finally, she placed the empty bowl to the side and said indifferently, All right, the medicine is finished. All right, the medicine has been used up. Let Imperial Father rest first. Chu Luiyue glanced at Imperial Father and vaguely saw that Imperial Father's complexion was much better. She felt slightly relieved. Since His Majesty has used the medicine, then if there's nothing else, I won't disturb you any longer. With that, she turned to leave. Wait. However, Shang Wanwan suddenly spoke up and stopped her. This consort has something to discuss with you in a bit. Without waiting for Chu Luiyue to reply, Shang Wanwan glanced at Zuomingshi again. It's best if there's someone watching Imperial Father. I'll have to trouble Lord Zhuo to stay here for a while. Zuomingshi hurriedly said. This humble subject will naturally do his best. Shang Wanwan walked out. When she brushed past Chu Luiyue, she gave her a meaningful look. Follow this consort. Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes and followed. The two left Clear Wind Palace's main hall and arrived at a side hall. The moment they entered, Chani tactfully closed the door. Chu Luiyue turned to look at the closed door and smiled. Third Princess, what are you doing? Shang Wanwan raised her chin slightly and ordered from above. This consort wants your divine beast's blood. Chu Luiyue had already guessed what she wanted to do, so she raised her brows without any shock. Third Princess should know that it's not an easy task to condense a divine beast's blood that contains the power of a bloodline, right? Dumpling already offered one earlier. If I give it to you now, I'm afraid that I'll suffer from a loss of blood. Shang Wanwan sneered. Chu Luiyue, don't play dumb in front of this consort. Back when this consort's face was scratched by this beast, this consort was already being especially merciful by not pursuing the matter of you and it. If you know what's good for you, you'd best obediently offer up the divine beast's blood right now. If it weren't for the fact that this red-tailed phoenix had already been contracted and couldn't change its master, she would definitely have snatched this divine beast as well. Chu Luiyue looked at her with her arms crossed and one hand lightly tapped her chin. Your words aren't without reason. After all, appearance is extremely important to any woman. Tomorrow is your wedding day. It's not good to have a face covered in scars. Besides, you can hide it for a while, but you can't hide it forever. Your true appearance will eventually be exposed for the world to see. Don't you think so? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 857. Shang Wanwan's heart suddenly trembled. Chu Luiyue's words were like a sudden clap of thunder that exploded in her ears. She immediately felt guilty and looked at Chu Luiyue in bewilderment. Was there a hidden meaning behind his words? However, Chu Luiyue's eyes were curved and he didn't seem to be implying anything. Shang Wanwan's heart felt like it was suffocating and she didn't know what to do. Just tell me, are you going to give me the mythical beast's blood or not? Chu Luiyue said with a smile. Third Princess wants it, so how can I not give it to her? Dumpling? She turned to look at Dumpling, who was nestled on her shoulder. It had already curled up into a ball and turned its head away, looking very disgusted. Not to mention that this blood was very precious to it. Even if it didn't want it, it wouldn't be willing to give it to Shang Wanwan. Chu Luiyue coaxed it a little, and Dumpling reluctantly offered up another blood bead. Shang Wanwan's eyes lit up. The blood bead hovered in the palm of her hand. Chu Luiyue said, Third Princess, it's not impossible for you to have it, but you have to take out something of equal value in exchange. Shang Wanwan sneered disdainfully. At the end of the day, Chu Luiyue just wants something. What do you want? Chu Luiyue's lips curled up slightly. I'll tell you what I want tomorrow. I hope that Third Princess won't be stingy when the time comes. Shang Wanwan frowned slightly. Tomorrow is my wedding day. I won't have time to deal with you then. Chu Luiyue's eyes seemed to flash. That's what I need to think about. Shang Wanwan didn't care. She had a lot of things to do at the wedding tomorrow. A mere Chu Luiyue wouldn't even have the right to talk to her. She had nothing to worry about. This consort agrees. Chu Luiyue smiled and nodded. With a flick of his finger, the blood bead flew toward Shang Wanwan. Since that's the case, I'll first wish Third Princess a smooth marriage and a blissful marriage with young Master Jiang. With that, Chu Luiyue did not stay any longer and turned around to leave. Shang Wanwan hurriedly grabbed the blood bead and impatiently swallowed it. In an instant, it seemed as if a flame had ignited in his chest. Shang Wanwan hurriedly took off the mask. An itchy and numb feeling came from the wound on her face. His entire body felt like it was surrounded by flames, scorching and painful. Shang Wanwan clenched her teeth tightly, forcing herself to endure this torture. As long as his appearance could be restored to normal, this was nothing. Chu Luiyue left Clear Wind Hall, his footsteps light. Dumpling had already returned to her body. Not bad. Chu Luiyue praised in her heart. Dumpling flapped its wings with a proud look in its eyes. Chu Luiyue saw its reaction and couldn't help laughing. She turned around to take a look. From here she could only see the eaves of the hall. At this time Shangguan should be impatiently swallowing the blood of the divine beast, right? She wondered if Shangguan would be satisfied with this small gift. After pausing for a moment, Chu Luiyue continued to walk forward. When she passed by a junction, Chu Luiyue turned and walked in another direction. The palace servant behind her hurriedly said, "Young Miss Chu, you can't go there." Chu Luiyue paused in her steps and then suddenly realized, "Look at me, I actually got the wrong direction." With that, she turned around and walked in another direction. The palace servant smiled apologetically. "You haven't entered the palace many times, so it's normal that you don't know the way. It's just that in the future you have to be more careful and don't go there casually." The news that Chu Luiyue had entered the palace to offer medicine and treat His Majesty had quietly spread in the palace. Everyone guessed that if there were no accidents, this person's identity would definitely be extraordinary in the future. Thus they scrambled to curry favor with her. Chu Luiyue smiled and asked seemingly unintentionally, "Oh? Why is that?" The palace servant looked conflicted, but in the end he lowered his voice and whispered, "That's the Imperial Ancestral Hall. It was burned down 2 years ago and has just been repaired. Ordinary people can't go there." Chu Luiyue nodded as if she understood. "I see. Thank you." The palace servant was flattered and repeatedly thanked her. On the way he talked about the various rules of the palace and some gossip. Chu Luiyue listened to one by one and gradually realized that Shangguan seemed to be very concerned about the burned ancestral hall. From a certain point of view, she was even stricter than guarding His Majesty. At that time she chose to go there. The ancestral hall should have been badly burned and no evidence was left. What was Shangguan afraid of? After leaving the palace, Jiang Yuqing went straight back to the Jiang mansion. But until now, the anger in his heart had not completely dissipated. When he thought of Shangguan's unreasonable and aggressive appearance, he felt a burst of irritation in his heart. What made him even more anxious was that when Chu Luiyue heard the two of them arguing, she was completely indifferent. She was like an outsider, calmly watching a play that had nothing to do with her. From beginning to end, she didn't look at him at all, and her expression didn't change at all. Jiang Yuqing pressed his chest. For some reason when he thought of this, his chest felt very tight. He closed his eyes as if he had suddenly made up his mind and said to Sun Qi, who was following behind him, "Go and ask Chu Luiyue to go to the zither room in Enrich Garden." Sun Qi was stunned. "Eldest young master, you are? Tomorrow was the wedding with the third princess. What did eldest young master want to do by asking Chu Luiyue at this time? Moreover, it was in the zither room in Thousand View Garden." Jiang Yuqing coldly glanced at him. Sun Qi immediately said, "Your subordinate will go right away. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network." Chapter 858. Not long after Chu Luiyue walked out of the palace, she met Sun Qi, who was looking for her. "Miss Chu, my eldest young master invites you to Enrich Garden." Sun Qi's words were concise and polite. Chu Luiyue was suspicious. Why did Jiang Yuqing come to find her at this time? And to Enrich Garden? Chu Luiyue smiled. "Eldest young master Jiang should be very busy today. Why do you have time to find me? Is there an urgent matter? Shouldn't Jiang Yuqing be preparing for tomorrow's matters the day before the wedding? Could it be that the matter of the Guqin had been discovered?" Chu Luiyue quickly rejected this idea as soon as it flashed through her mind. Impossible. She did what she did that day very secretly and didn't leave any hidden dangers. Even after that, she never used the peach blossom mark on her wrist in front of anyone. Or could it be that her identity as Shimu was exposed? That didn't seem very likely. These people didn't know about the transparent hellfire in the heavenly square cauldron. Moreover, no matter which of these two situations it was, Jiang Yuqing would definitely come to settle the score with her personally. He definitely wouldn't send Sun Qi over and be very polite. This subordinate doesn't know about this either. Sun Qi lowered his head slightly. "Please do me a favor, Miss Chu." Chu Luiyue didn't want to agree at first. She felt disgusted just by looking at Jiang Yuqing, not to mention such a special invitation. Thinking about it, she felt that something was wrong. She thought for a moment and nodded in the end. Okay. Time passed slowly. After a long period of suffering, the painful and itchy feeling on Shangguan's face finally disappeared. At this time she was drenched in sweat and looked like she was about to collapse. But after she woke up, the first thing she did was to rush to the bronze mirror next to her to look at her face. Her face was reflected in the bronze mirror. The wounds on her face that had been festering continuously before had already scabbed over. They formed a light pink scar. Although it still looked terrifying, it was much better than before. Shangguan was pleasantly surprised. She carefully touched her face. How long had it been since he had taken the divine beast's blood, and it was already so effective. If he were to use some other medicine later on, he would definitely be able to recover completely very quickly. The problem of her appearance had been tormenting her for a long time, and now she could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Ben Gong will definitely get better. Shangguan murmured in a low voice. The stubbornness in her eyes was frightening. Men. Chani, who had been waiting outside, immediately pushed open the door and entered. What orders does your highness have? She bowed respectfully and inadvertently raised her head to take a look. Immediately she was pleasantly surprised. Your highness, your face is much better now. Although Shangguan hated it when others saw her disfigured face, she was getting better. Besides, Chani was happy for her, so she didn't mind. I still need to recuperate. Go and prepare first. Ben Gong wants to bathe and change clothes. Chani hurriedly said, Yes. I'll go right away. Just as she was about to leave, Shangguan suddenly called out to her, her lips moving before she asked hesitantly, What's wrong? She pursed her lips and asked hesitantly, Did Yuqing come back? The smile on Chani's face instantly froze. Shangguan's heart suddenly turned cold. Your Highness, eldest young master didn't come back. Chani lowered her head and her voice became much softer. The room instantly fell into dead silence. Shangguan clenched her teeth, and deep resentment flashed across her eyes. In the past, the two of them rarely quarreled, but in the past few months, he had become increasingly impatient with her. Today he even embarrassed her in front of so many people. She originally thought that he would come back to coax her, but it had been so long and he didn't react at all. Your Highness, eldest young master might have been busy recently, so he couldn't hold it in and said such harsh words to you. Chani saw that her expression was off and hurriedly mediated. After all, eldest young master is also worried about his majesty. Besides, think about it. Tomorrow is the wedding, and eldest young master definitely hopes to live happily in the future. Yet you said such things. Shangguan's mood finally eased a little. After thinking for a moment, she glanced at the sky outside. Forget it. After I wash up, this consort will personally go find him. In the end, she still had him in her heart. She had already waited too long for tomorrow's wedding. She truly didn't want the two of them to fall out like this. At worst, she would just lower her head first. Jiang residence. It was already afternoon. Everyone in the Jiang residence had been busy the entire day, but the residence was still very lively. Everything was meticulously decorated, making it look very festive. Shangguan changed her clothes and quietly came over. Because she had often secretly gone to find Jiang Yuqing in the past, when Jiang Yuqing's people saw her coming, they would directly let her in and even help cover for her. However, when Shangguan successfully arrived at Jiang Yuqing's courtyard, she discovered that he wasn't in the residence. Calculating the time after he left the palace, he should have returned a long time ago. Then did he go somewhere else on the way? It's already at this time. Where else can he go? Shangguan was unhappy that she missed him. Just as she was planning to wait here, she suddenly remembered that Jiang Yuqing had hurriedly hidden a painting in the study that day. This was an opportunity for him to go and find out more. Hence, Shangguan planned to go to the study to take a look. But when she walked to the door, she was stopped by a few guards on duty. Your Highness, eldest young master has instructed that nobody can casually enter the study without his permission. Why don't you rest in the room at the side first? Upon hearing this, Shangguan chuckled. I'm getting married to Yuqing tomorrow. Can it be that I can't even enter this study? The guards looked at each other in dismay. They were also in a difficult position. Both parties were in a stalemate for a while before the few of them finally chose to let her in. After all, if Shangguan's status was higher, they couldn't afford to offend her even more. Previously, she had directly entered the study a few times, so it shouldn't be a problem. Shangguan then entered the study as she wished. Even though she didn't know everything here very well, she was rather familiar with it as she had been here quite a few times in the past. There were many books and paintings in the room and most of them were extremely valuable. But perhaps because he had quite a few good items, Jiang Yuqing didn't really care about these. There were many valuable items casually placed on the table and bookshelf. Shangguan was even more confused. According to Jiang Yuqing's judgment, what kind of painting could make him treasure it so much? She followed the scene she saw that day and walked to the side of the table. After searching for a while, she finally found the checkpoint and opened the secret compartment at the bottom. There was a wooden box lying quietly in the middle. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from my UN. Chapter 859. Shangguanwan's heart suddenly sped up and thumped loudly. She looked around vigilantly before carefully taking out the wooden box. Even Jiang Yuqing didn't know that Shangguanwan had already figured out some of the mechanisms in his study. However, she had never done such a thing before. She knew that once Jiang Yuqing found out, he would definitely fly into a rage. But this time she was really too curious. Shangguanwan carefully looked at the wooden box in her hand. This wooden box was made of agarwood and exuded a faint fragrance. The paint was smooth and the patterns were exquisite. It was very exquisite and luxurious. For some reason the lock on the box wasn't stuck. Shangguanwan thought that it was probably because he was in too much of a hurry to keep this thing that day and forgot to lock it. She held her breath and opened the wooden box. There was indeed a scroll of painting hidden inside. Shangguanwan didn't know why, but she was so nervous that her palms were sweating. She had a premonition in her heart that Jiang Yuqing's secret might really be hidden in this scroll of painting. Then she took out the painting. This thing seemed to be quite old. Whether it was the scroll or the drawing paper, they all looked a little old. However, it was well preserved. It was obvious that its owner treasured it. Shangguanwan didn't blink as she slowly unrolled the scroll of painting. When she saw the content clearly, Shangguanwan's eyes suddenly widened. In the painting was a woman dressed in palace attire. She was standing by the lake. She seemed to have heard something. She turned around and smiled sweetly. She had snow-white skin, cherry lips, and bright eyes. Her attire set off her noble aura. However, this bright smile and the craftiness in her eyes made people's hearts beat faster. If she was originally as bright as the moon, cold and noble, then this smile instantly added a touch of smoke and fire. It made people feel as if they could reach out their hand and grab the moon from the sky. She was devastatingly beautiful and had a heavenly fragrance. That was probably it. However, what shocked Shangguanwan wasn't that Jiang Yuqing had collected such a woman's portrait, but that the woman in the portrait was Shangguanyu. It was the Shangguanyu who used to be so high and mighty that it seemed unreachable. But in the end, it chose to sever its desires and fall into the abyss of death. With a thud, the painting fell from Shangguanwan's hands. However, the woman in the painting was still smiling so beautifully. It was as if all the colors in the world had gathered on that one person. It was incomparable. In an instant, it was as if thunder had descended from the sky. Shangguanwan's mind went completely blank. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, and she felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. From the inside to the outside, from the top to the bottom, it was bone-chilling. She stumbled and bumped into a chair, almost falling to the ground. "No, that's impossible, that's absolutely impossible," Shangguanwan murmured in a low voice. No one knew who she was trying to explain or who she was trying to convince. That was Shangguanyu. That was Shangguanyu. She knew that Jiang Yuqing used to like Shangguanyu, but that was all in the past, wasn't it? He was the one who had poisoned her. He was the one who had kidnapped her and sent her to the ancestral hall. He was also the one who had personally attacked Shangguanyu. He had forced her into a dead end. If he still cherished and missed Shangguanyu, why would he do that? It was precisely because of those things that Shangguanwan was convinced that Jiang Yuqing had completely lost all feelings for Shangguanyu. However, it wasn't until now that she suddenly realized that everything she thought was wrong. Shangguanwan's face was as pale as a ghost. Her eyes were lifeless, and her heart felt as if it had been twisted by someone. It was so painful that she almost suffocated. She suddenly came back to her senses and hurriedly picked up the painting. Then she bit her lip and looked at it carefully. The Shangguanyu in the painting looked a little young, as if she was only 13 or 14 years old. Shangguanwan's heart skipped a beat. She remembered now. This palace dress was indeed the one that Shangguanyu wore when she was 14 years old. She was born as an imperial concubine, so her hairpin ceremony was naturally very grand. Shangguanwan could still clearly remember that many people came to the palace that day. Everyone was laughing and praising Shangguanyu. Shangguanyu, who had just turned 15 years old, was actually just a budding young girl, but she had already attracted the admiration of countless people. Some people were born to be favored by the heavens and were the center of attention. Shangguanyu was such an existence. Why did Jiang Yuqing have such a painting? Shangguanwan's gaze shifted slightly and she saw the inscription at the bottom of the painting. It was a small line of words. On the 10th day of the 8th lunar month in the 31st year of Yuanjin. My heart is filled with joy when I see her and I yearn for her. This was personally painted by Jiang Yuqing on that day. It had been 10 years since then. Shangguanwan stared at the line of words as if she wanted to burn a hole in it. She gripped the scroll so tightly that her knuckles turned white. If not for the last bit of rationality left in her, she would definitely tear this painting into pieces. So it turns out. For so many years, Jiang Yuqing had only liked her, Shangguanyu, from the beginning to the end. If he didn't miss it, why would he keep such a painting so carefully? And she, Shangguanwan, was at most a joke. For the past few years he had given her advice, and he had been obedient to her. She had always thought that she was special to Jiang Yuqing. But now she finally realized that she was actually worthless to Jiang Yuqing. She threw the painting on the table and covered her face with her hands. She cried and laughed at the same time as if she had gone crazy. Just a moment ago she was still thinking of taking the initiative to repair their relationship. Even if she took the initiative to lower her head, it didn't matter. She was willing. As long as they could reconcile, as long as the wedding tomorrow could be held smoothly, as long as everything was fine in the future. Shangguanwan's chest seemed to be surging crazily. Then her face turned pale and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Her aura quickly withered and she fell into a chair. The guard outside heard the commotion and knocked on the door worriedly. He lowered his voice and asked, "Your Highness, are you all right?" Shangguanwan's mind was in a mess. She was stunned for a moment, and her body stiffly put the painting back. Then she got up and walked outside, asking word by word, "Now, where exactly is he?" Exanli Garden Music Room. When Chu Luiyue arrived, she saw Jiang Yuqing standing by the lake. He was dressed in a green robe and stood with his hands behind his back. He looked at the lake in a daze and no one knew what he was thinking. When he heard footsteps he turned around. When he saw that it was Chu Luiyue, his gaze became much gentler. Chu Luiyue's eyes flickered and she walked over. "Eldest young master, why are you looking for me?" Jiang Yuqing looked at her, and there seemed to be an undercurrent in his eyes. After a moment he suddenly said, "I want to marry you. I want to marry you." Chapter 860. Chu Luiyue thought that she had misheard. "What?" Jiang Yuqing repeated. "I said, I want to marry you." It wasn't a want or a request, but a want. He seemed to be giving an order, not discussing it with anyone. It was a matter of course and self-righteous. Chu Luiyue widened her eyes slightly as she looked at Jiang Yuqing. His expression was serious and his eyes were clear. He didn't look like he was joking. This matter was so absurd that for a moment Chu Luiyue thought that Jiang Yuqing had gone crazy. "Eldest young master Jiang, do you know what you're saying?" Chu Luiyue was baffled. Was there something wrong with Jiang Yuqing's brain? The night before his wedding with Shangguanwan, he asked her to come here and even said that he wanted to marry her. "Of course I know what I'm doing." Jiang Yuqing seemed to have expected Chu Luiyue's reaction and replied naturally. "I've thought about it a lot these 2 days and I finally made up my mind." It wasn't easy for him to make this decision. Jiang Yuqing knew better than anyone what he should and shouldn't do now. He knew that from the first time he saw Chu Luiyue smile at the Wanzheng competition, he had already developed some feelings for her. From then on, he purposely restrained himself and wanted to get rid of the thoughts he had about Chu Luiyue. He thought that if he didn't meet or say anything, he would gradually forget about these things. But it was too difficult. In the mystic forest, she had already made him waver again when she saved him. In the end, what made him decide to do this was the meeting a few days ago. At that moment, he almost couldn't tell whether the person in front of him was Shangguanyu or Chu Luiyue. Chu Luiyue was very similar to her, but there were many differences. He had always known this. However, after that glance, a crazy idea suddenly appeared in his mind. If you can't tell, then so be it. Whether it was Shangguanyu or Chu Luiyue, it was fine as long as this person was standing in front of him. That person was already dead, his soul extinguished, never to return. He had once planned to bury the past and never mention it again. However, after Chu Luiyue appeared, he suddenly felt as if a certain part of his heart had been filled up. He had seen countless beauties of all shapes and sizes. But after so many years, there were only 2 people who could give him such a feeling. One was Shangguanyu. And then there was Chu Luiyue. Fortunately, Chu Luiyue came from a humble background and was not as high and mighty as that person, who was as high as the clouds and as unreachable as the sun. "You just have to stay by my side. I can give you whatever you want," Jiang Yuqing said seriously. This was not a mirage of an alliance but an actual promise. Given his status, he indeed had the confidence to say such a thing. Seeing Jiang Yuqing's confident look, Chu Luiyue was so angry that she laughed. "Young Master Jiang, I'm afraid you don't remember some things clearly. Let me remind you. First, you're going to marry the 3rd princess tomorrow. If you do this, what will you do to the 3rd princess? Second, your status will change again tomorrow. From now on, You will be the third princess's husband and her subject. I don't think I need to tell you how to write the word loyalty. Third, from the beginning to the end, you didn't seem to ask for my opinion. Isn't this a little too arbitrary? Chu Liyue raised her chin slightly, and her red lips curved into an extremely cold smile. Also, you really can't give me what I want. It was already evening. The sun was setting in the west, and the setting sun reflected the sky into a warm orange color. The night wind of early summer still carried a trace of heat. However, Sheng Wanwan, who had rushed to Exanli Garden, felt her entire body turn cold. Many scenes flashed through her mind one after another. One moment, it was the comings and goings of Jiang Yuqing and Sheng Guanyu. The next moment, it was the face of despair in the Imperial Ancestral Hall. The next moment, it was the painting that had been kept for 10 years in the study. She was filled with anger, but she didn't know how to vent it. She could only crazily surge in her chest, making her feel like she was about to explode. At this moment, she only had one thought in her mind: find Jiang Yuqing and ask him clearly. When the guards of Exanli Garden saw Sheng Wanwan, they were all shocked and hurriedly bowed. Greetings to the third princess. What was she doing here at this time? Where's Jiang Yuqing? Sheng Wanwan asked coldly. Seeing that her expression was very ugly, the guard didn't dare to hide anything and immediately said, Eldest young master is in the zither room of Thousand View Garden. This subordinate will send someone to inform. Before he could finish his sentence, Sheng Wanwan had already rushed over. Third princess. The two guards wanted to stop her, but they didn't dare to. Although Exanli Garden had always been managed by Jiang Yuqing, it was still the territory of the Tianling imperial family. If Sheng Wanwan wanted to enter, who would dare to stop her? The two of them looked at each other and saw the doubt and uneasiness in each other's eyes. Could the third princess be going to find trouble with eldest young master? Could it be that she's going to make a big scene? Sheng Wanwan didn't stop and kept walking forward. When she thought about how he was actually in that place right now, the hatred in her heart deepened. Of all places to go, he just had to come to the zither room. In the past, she thought that Jiang Yuqing was guarding this place strictly because she had harmed Sheng Guanyu. Now that she thought about it, he probably treasured the place she had stayed in before. She hurriedly walked over and saw the sparkling surface of the lake from afar. Just as she was about to go forward, she suddenly saw two people standing by the lake. One of them was dressed in green and stood with his hands behind his back. It was Jiang Yuqing. However, the person in front of him was dressed in a red dress, with long black hair and a beautiful face. Who else could it be but Chu Liyue? Why was she here? Sheng Wanwan was stunned for a moment. She felt that there was something wrong between the two of them, so she instinctively stopped and hid her figure. At this moment, Jiang Yuqing's voice sounded. Tomorrow's wedding is between me and Sheng Wanwan. You don't have to worry about whether I've let her down or not. In addition, even if she's the ruler and I'm the subject after tomorrow, it doesn't mean that I have to do everything according to her wishes. Finally, I think that marrying me will definitely bring you more benefits than disadvantages. There are countless women in the Tianling dynasty who want to cling to me, but they can't compare to you. Not you. Therefore, I only said what I said just now to you. If you insist, then I'll ask you again. I want to marry you. Are you willing? Sheng Wanwan suddenly covered her mouth. Chu Liyue narrowed her eyes and suddenly smiled. Her expression was originally cold, as if covered with a thin layer of ice, but her smile instantly bloomed like thousands of flowers. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on her snow-white face. She was beautiful and peerless, and her eyes were as bright as stars. I don't want to. She smiled. I have someone I like. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 861. Jiang Yuqing was suddenly stunned. How familiar was this scene? Once upon a time, that person was also like this. Here, she told him with a smile that her heart already belonged to someone else. The same place, the same words, the same smile. The only difference was that when that person said this to him in the past, he didn't even have time to express his feelings. But now he put down his attitude and sincerely asked Chu Liyue to be with him, but he was also rejected. For a moment, Jiang Yuqing almost mixed up the two scenes. He couldn't tell whether the person in front of him was Chu Liyue or Sheng Guanyu. Something suddenly surged from the bottom of his heart. He grabbed Chu Liyue's wrist. That won't do. Chu Liyue easily dodged. Although Jiang Yuqing's cultivation level was higher than hers, after the experience in the Red Moon Desert, her movement technique had improved too much. It wasn't difficult to deal with Jiang Yuqing. Chu Liyue took a step back and raised her eyebrows slightly. The smile on her face faded a little. Eldest young Master Jiang, please conduct yourself with dignity. The disgust and disdain that flashed through her eyes suddenly pierced Jiang Yuqing's heart like a steel needle. The resentment that had been suppressed for many years suddenly gushed out. It almost went to Jiang Yuqing's head. He almost blurted out angrily, "I won't allow it. You can't like anyone else except me." Jiang Yuqing's sudden outburst surprised Chu Luiyue. In her impression, Jiang Yuqing rarely became so angry no matter what the situation was. Even when he was harming people, his expression was always calm and collected. Why did it seem like he had been provoked? Chu Luiyue became vigilant and took another step back. She frowned and said coldly, "Liking someone can't be forced. Jiang Yuqing, wake up." Jiang Yuqing's heart trembled for some reason when he saw her getting angry. He looked at the pair of black jade-like eyes that were filled with anger, and his expression changed. He opened his mouth but his voice lowered again. "You don't be angry," he murmured in a low voice as if he was begging her. He reached out his hand to pull her again. Chu Luiyue felt that Jiang Yuqing was really crazy. What was he doing? Who was he calling? A deep sense of disgust arose in her heart, and she turned around to leave. However, at this moment, a voice filled with anger and resentment came from the side. "Jiang Yuqing." Chu Luiyue looked up. What a coincidence, the person who came was Shang Wanwan. Just now, when she was arguing with Jiang Yuqing, she didn't notice that someone had come. From the looks of it, she must have heard a lot of things just now, right? However, no matter how much she heard, Jiang Yuqing's every word was like a sharp knife to her, ruthlessly stabbing into her heart. This sharp roar finally brought Jiang Yuqing back to his senses. He looked at his empty hand. Chu Luiyue stood to the side, far away from him. Her entire body was filled with disgust for him, as if looking at him any longer would dirty her eyes. He suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart. It was like this in the past and it was still like this now. The emotions in his eyes quickly turned cold. He looked at Shang Wanwan and asked coldly, "Why are you here?" Shang Wanwan sneered. "This consort is the third princess, and this Xanli garden is an imperial garden. Why can't this consort come here? But you, Jiang Yuqing, we're getting married tomorrow, but what are you doing? You're actually asking to marry another woman? Jiang Yuqing, do you even have a heart?" Only she knew how much her heart hurt when she heard those words just now. She thought that her heart had already become numb after seeing that portrait. However, when she came here and heard how he treated Chu Luiyue, she realized that it could be even more painful. It was as if someone had grabbed her heart, pulled it out, threw it on the ice and ruthlessly trampled on it. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. Jiang Yuqing frowned as he looked at the hysterical Shang Wanwan. He had already sent away the nearby guards in advance. He originally wanted to have a good talk with Chu Luiyue, but he didn't expect that Shang Wanwan would barge in and make such a scene. "Calm down. As a princess, what's the difference between you and a shrew if you make such a scene?" Jiang Yuqing coldly reprimanded. These words completely ignited the anger in Shang Wanwan's heart. Shrew? You called me a shrew?" Shang Wanwan pointed at her own nose as if she had heard the funniest joke in the world. She shrieked, "Jiang Yuqing, you betrayed me first." Then she fiercely pointed at Chu Luiyue next to her. "What's so good about this slut that she's worth it for you to do this? She's just a lowly thing, but you actually treated me like this for her." Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes dangerously. However, before she could do anything, Jiang Yuqing took the lead to speak coldly. "Shang Wanwan, watch your words. Don't forget your status." Shang Wanwan suddenly laughed. Her facial features were distorted and her eyes were crazed. She slowly said, "Jiang Yuqing, do you think I don't know what you like about her? Isn't it because she looks 50% similar to Shang Wanyu?" Jiang Yuqing's heart thumped. His voice was stern. "What nonsense are you talking about?" However, Shang Wanwan turned a blind eye to his anger. Instead, she turned her head to look at Chu Luiyue with a mocking gaze. "Chu Luiyue, do you think he's sincere to you? You're just a substitute. Your eyebrows and eyes are exactly the same as my short-lived elder sister, Shang Wanyu. You can't forget that person. Now that he's looking for you, you're just a substitute." Shang Wanwan. Jiang Yuqing felt that something was wrong. He quickly stepped forward, grabbed Shang Wanwan's hand and was about to leave. "Your brain is muddled. I'll take you to clear your head." Shang Wanwan flung his hand away. "Don't touch me. I'm very clear-headed." Her eyes were red and she looked embarrassed. She stared at Jiang Yuqing and sneered. Finally, she whispered, "Jiang Yuqing, what are you afraid of? Are you afraid that she'll find out that you're just treating her as a substitute for Shang Wanyu?" Or are you afraid that people will find out that you're still obsessed with Shangguan even though you're getting married to me tomorrow? Or are you most afraid that people will find out that you've liked Shangguan for 10 years, but in the end you personally slap? There was a loud slap in the face. Shangguan staggered and fell to the ground. Half of her face quickly turned red and swollen, and blood seeped out of the corner of her mouth. It was obvious how hard that slap was. Jiang Yuqing looked down at her with a murderous look in his eyes. Shangguan, you're crazy. Chu Liwei stood at the side and watched this scene with a cold expression. It was as if she was watching a show that had nothing to do with her. Looking at the two hysterical people who were at each other's throats, she suddenly curled her lips and looked at them coldly. How laughable. The scene from 2 years ago was happening again. But this time, everyone's identities were reversed. The pain that they had inflicted on her in the past was slowly being exacted back on them. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 862. She hadn't done anything yet, but the two of them were already fighting among themselves. It was finally their turn to experience the bone-piercing pain of betrayal that she had experienced back then. Chu Liwei tucked the loose strands of hair on her cheeks behind her ears, looking like she was ready to watch a good show. If it were anyone else, they would definitely want to leave immediately after seeing this scene. After all, the two people who were fighting were the Honorable Third Princess and Jiang Yuqing, who had the power to overturn the imperial court. Anyone who had anything to do with these two people would probably get into trouble. The more they knew, the more dangerous it would be. Chu Liwei was different. These two were her old enemies. She couldn't be happier to see them causing such a ruckus. What was there to be afraid of? The ones who should be afraid were these two people. Jiang Yuqing's slap made Shangguan see stars before her eyes, and a strong smell of blood instantly surged up between her lips and teeth. But this time she finally regained some of her rationality. Chu Liwei was still standing next to them. If she really revealed everything just now, the consequences would be unimaginable. Shangguan covered her face. Her heart was filled with lingering fear, and her eyes were filled with regret. Jiang Yuqing looked down at her condescendingly. In his heart he really wanted to kill her. Shangguan had always been impulsive, reckless, arrogant, and willful. In the past 2 years, her temper had become worse and worse. He had been enduring it all this time, but he didn't expect her to be brainless to this extent. If he hadn't stopped her in time, would she have loudly told everyone what they had done? Although Jiang Yuqing liked Chu Liwei, he had never thought of telling her these things. Such a confidential matter involved many people. If they weren't careful, they would die. However, Shangguan almost revealed everything. Guards, Jiang Yuqing ordered. 2 people immediately came out from the shadows and knelt on one knee. Greetings, young master. The third princess is delirious for a moment and needs to rest in bed. Prepare a carriage immediately and accompany me to send the third princess back to the palace. Yes. The 2 guards didn't dare to say anything and just followed Jiang Yuqing's instructions. Shangguan wanted to say something, but Jiang Yuqing grabbed her wrist and pulled her up from the ground. She was a little scared and stepped back to hide. The look in Jiang Yuqing's eyes just now was too frightening. Moreover, when she thought about how Jiang Yuqing had been infatuated with Shangguan for 10 years and still couldn't forget her, she felt as if she had swallowed a fly. She felt extremely nauseous. Jiang Yuqing tightened his grip on her hand that was trying to break free. He gave her a warning look, but his tone was much gentler. You seem to be sick. I'll take you back to the palace to have a good rest. Shangguan was both disgusted and afraid. Her wrist hurt from his grip, but she didn't dare to be presumptuous and didn't dare to say a word. Jiang Yuqing was satisfied and turned to look at Chu Liwei. I've let you see a joke. Just pretend that today's matter never happened. He didn't want to kill Chu Liwei. Besides, Chu Liwei now had a mythological beast and a dancing lotus. His status was different from before and couldn't be easily touched. Chu Liwei nodded in understanding. He didn't say anything else and directly left without looking sideways. He didn't even look back after walking far away. When Chu Liwei's figure finally disappeared, Jiang Yuqing looked coldly at Shangguan. What do you know? His voice was cold and merciless as if he was interrogating a prisoner. Shangguan shivered and turned her head away. I don't know anything. Jiang Yuqing squeezed her wrist and her bones creaked. Shangguan was in so much pain that her face turned pale. Speak. It hurts. I'll tell you. Shangguan finally couldn't take it anymore. She braced herself and shouted, I went to your study. Jiang Yuqing instantly understood, and his expression became extremely dangerous. "You touched my painting?" Shangguan had never heard him speak to her in such a tone. She felt wronged and resentful, but there was also a deep fear in her heart. Tears flowed down her cheeks. "I did touch it. I saw your painting. So what?" "Jiang Yuqing, from the beginning to the end, you only loved Shangguan Yu. You admired her for 10 years, but what did you do to me?" Jiang Yuqing looked at her expressionlessly. "There's no point in saying all this. For the sake of tomorrow's wedding, I'll let you go this time. But don't let me know that you did such a thing again. I'll send you back later. Prepare well. Don't make any mistakes tomorrow. As for everything that happened today, you'd better never mention it again." Shangguan smiled bitterly. "Jiang Yuqing, what am I in your eyes? But if you really treat her so well, why did you ask me to deal with her? Don't forget, you were the one who forced her into a dead end." Jiang Yuqing suddenly leaned closer, pinched her chin and said word by word, "I did those things. You don't have to remind me over and over again. If you must have an answer, then I'll tell you, I've never compared you to her. I can kill her and I can kill you even more, understand?" After saying that, he shook Shangguan's face away. Shangguan lowered her head, and the hatred in her heart kept surging. But in the end she still said, "I understand. Tomorrow's wedding. Everything will go according to your plan." Tianling Dynasty, 41st year of Yuanjin, June 6. Third Princess Shangguan and the eldest son of Grand Tutor Jiang Lizhua, Jiang Yuqing, were getting married. Digression. At 6 o'clock, mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from AI. Net. Chapter 863. The third princess's wedding and coronation ceremony was naturally a joyous occasion for the entire nation. The entire Shilling city had been bustling with activity since 3 days ago. On the 6th day of the 6th month, everyone's enthusiasm reached its peak. On the streets, red satin fluttered, and almost every household hung red lanterns for celebration. Ever since the crown princess passed away 2 years ago, the huge Shilling city had never celebrated so wildly. Countless people flooded the streets and there were cheers and laughter everywhere. Everyone's faces were filled with excitement and anticipation. They wanted to see what kind of grand wedding it was and at the same time, share in the joyous atmosphere. The streets leading from the Jiang mansion to the imperial palace had long been divided into 2 groups of black cavalry, each guarding strictly. The red brocade spread out for miles. Golden auspicious clouds were embroidered on it, and under the morning sun, it shone brightly, luxurious and imposing. Ordinary princesses' weddings were not qualified to use such a spectacle. But today Shangguan was going to ascend to the throne as the empress. As the empress, she naturally could afford to use these. In front of the Jiang mansion, 108 strings of firecrackers sounded in succession. Fireworks flew in the air, and a thick layer of fireworks covered the ground inside and outside the Jiang mansion. A snow-kicking black-headed foal appeared in front of the Jiang mansion. This was an 8th-grade demonic beast with a strong body and strong limbs. Its entire body was pure black, and only its 4 hooves were snow-white as if it was flying through the snow. Its fur was without a trace of impurities, and its eyes were blue-green, as clear and clean as turquoise stones. Amidst countless people's anticipation, Jiang Yuqing finally walked out at 9 a.m. Today he wore a red brocade robe, and his hair was tied up with a white jade crown. He was originally a famous handsome man in Shilling City, and today's attire made him look tall and slender, with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes, very handsome. Therefore when he came out, it immediately attracted a series of low exclamations from the crowd. Many women looked at him with bright eyes and blushed cheeks, their faces full of unconcealable adoration. Whether it was background, appearance, or talent, Jiang Yuqing was definitely the best. Such a person, only the imperial princess is worthy of such a person. A low murmur of discussion came from the crowd. I don't think it's that good to have a marriage alliance with the royal family. Especially when he was with the third princess, he was even less free. First, it's the etiquette between a ruler and his minister, and then the way of husband and wife. That may be the case, but from today onwards the status of the entire Jiang family will rise by a level. Even eldest young master Jiang himself will have more say in the imperial court. There are many people in the world who want such a good thing. Exactly. Previously he already had a lot of power in his hands, but he didn't have a suitable identity. As time passed, it was inevitable that people would criticize him. But as long as he marries the third princess, won't all of this be natural? Isn't it all because the empress concubine suddenly passed away back then? There were many things that could only be urgently handed over to him to handle. In the end, after he took over, he was unwilling to return it. He endured until now and continued to do so. In the future, no one will be able to stop him from doing whatever he wants. Shh. Keep it down. Are you tired of living? If such words were heard, they wouldn't have a good ending. Fortunately, the streets were crowded and very noisy at this time. Apart from the people nearby, no one else could hear such discussions. Jiang Yuqing walked to the front of the snow-kicking black-headed colt, leaped and easily mounted the horse. Behind him, the ceremonial team had already finished their preparations. They carried mahogany chests filled with all kinds of treasures and lined them up one after another. There was almost no end in sight. Apart from the Jiang residents that prepared the betrothal gifts, no one could guess how rich the items inside were. Jiang Yuqing lightly kicked the horse's belly, and it immediately moved forward. Gongs and drums were beating on the streets and ceremonial music sounded. Jiang Yuqing led his people towards the imperial palace. The crowd surged along with him. From afar, the array was astonishing. Because today's wedding ceremony was a little special and was held in the Longquan Palace in the imperial palace, all the important figures of the Tianling dynasty directly entered the palace and waited for Jiang Yuqing's arrival. Jiang Yuqing sat high on the horse. When he raised his head, he could see the heavy and majestic imperial palace. His expression was calm and an undercurrent flashed through his eyes. He had imagined such a scene many times. In the end, after so many years, it finally came true. But standing at the end of this palace road, waiting for him behind the door, was already another person. But that was not important. What he had to do was to cross that door. As for who the person behind the door was, it was not important. On the other hand, the palace had been preparing since before dawn. The process of the ceremony was complicated and tedious, and there were many things to be used. Chani checked with the people sent by the Ministry of Rites over and over again, afraid that she would miss something. In the main hall of Huayang Palace, Shangguan also woke up early and began to let two experienced nannies help her dress and make up. Of course, she had already put on a mask in advance. Although the wounds on her face had improved a lot and were no longer festering, scabs of different depths still formed because of the scabs. If she wanted to completely remove them, it would probably take another month or so. Moreover, half of her cheek was red and swollen from Jiang Yuqing's slap, and it had yet to fade. The two nannies were both old people in the palace. They had once sent several princesses to their weddings and were very experienced. But when they came to Huayang Palace to help Shangguan dress and make up, the two of them simultaneously became nervous. Shangguan was still going to ascend to the throne today. They had served several princesses before, but this was the first time they had served someone of this status and standard. Everyone knew that everything at the ceremony had to be done carefully and cautiously. There could not be the slightest mistake. In the 1,000-year history of the Tianling dynasty, there had been empresses before, but there were not many. Originally, they had all thought that the crown princess would inherit the throne this time. They did not expect that something would happen later, and Her Majesty would fall into a coma. After going around in circles, this position actually fell into the hands of this previously unremarkable third princess, Shangguan. In addition, the two of them quickly discovered another problem. Shangguan did not seem to be in a very good mood. She sat there expressionlessly, and the cold aura around her almost froze the entire space in the room. This was strange. Today was her big day. It was her wedding and her ascension to the throne. It was already extremely difficult for the world to ask for one of them, let alone her having both. From today onwards, she was the most honorable person in the entire Tianling dynasty. From now on, millions of miles of territory belonged to her. What else could she be unhappy about? Let's not talk about this. Just Jiang Yuqing alone is the dream man of millions of women. Which woman in the world did not envy her? But they definitely did not dare to ask such a question. The two nannies helped Shangguan dress and change into the phoenix coronet and robes with trembling hands. After everything was done, Chan Yi's voice finally came from outside. The prince consort has entered the palace. A better reading experience came from the Love Network. Chapter 864. Upon hearing this, Shangguan's face, which had been as cold as ice, finally showed a trace of emotion. It was finally here. Your Highness, the prince consort is very handsome today. The palace maid who came to report the news said happily. However, the main hall was still silent after she finished speaking. Shangguan said calmly, I understand. This consort understands. You may leave. The palace maid was stunned. What was going on? Why did the third princess not seem happy at all after hearing this news? If it was an ordinary woman, shouldn't she be shy and happy when she heard that her husband was coming to marry her? But why did the third princess's expression seem as if she didn't care at all? The palace maid had wanted to say a few nice words to ask for a reward, but she ended up in such a situation. For a moment, she was at a loss and didn't know whether to advance or retreat. What are you still standing there for? Do what you should be doing. If there is even the slightest oversight, you will be held accountable. Chan-yi, who was waiting at the door, reprimanded in a low voice with a cold expression. The palace maid was startled and hurriedly agreed in a submissive manner. Why yes. With that, she retreated timidly. When she walked outside, she was still confused. Strange. The third princess and the prince consort had always been very loving. There was no reason for them to be like this on the wedding day. Could it be that the third princess was unhappy because she praised the prince consort? That was still possible. Thinking of this, the palace maid secretly scolded herself for being stupid. In the main hall, Shang Wanwan looked at her reflection in the bronze mirror. Her injuries had been completely covered, and her exquisite makeup made her look even more beautiful than usual. Disregarding everything else, Shang Wanwan was also one of the top beauties in Xiling City. Today she was dressed up splendidly, which made her even more beautiful. However, her eyes, which carried a trace of resentment, ruined the beauty of her face. She looked a little bitter and unkind. When a nanny saw this, she smiled and said fawningly, "The third princess's eyes are really beautiful. The third princess is truly as beautiful as a painting. She's like a fairy. After so many years, this servant has served many masters, but you are really the most beautiful one." The other nanny also hurriedly echoed. Yes. If the prince consort sees you, he will definitely be shocked. Shang Wanwan sneered in her heart. She slowly stroked the phoenix hairpin on her head and asked softly, "What's the matter?" Then how is this consort compared to eldest sister? Shang Wanwan's elder sister was naturally only one person, the former princess Shang Wanyu. As soon as this was said, the two old maids were instantly stunned and embarrassed. Shang Wanwan was indeed beautiful, but compared to that person she was still a far cry. Not to mention his facial features, just his aura was different from the rest. Shang Wanwan was a worldly beauty, but the empress concubine's beauty was like the sun in the clouds, causing people to only admire her. Even if they looked at her more, they would feel that it was blasphemous. There was really no way to compare. One of the nannies reacted quickly and smiled. Today is His Highness' big day, so you are naturally the most beautiful. Shang Wanwan didn't say anything, but her eyes were filled with sarcasm. She didn't need them to say anything. She also knew that her appearance couldn't compare to Shang Wanyu. In that painting, Shang Wanyu was only 14 years old, but she was already a rare beauty. It was no wonder that Jiang Yuqing had been thinking about her for 10 years. At this moment, the sound of ceremonial music suddenly came from outside. Everyone knew that it was the bridegroom's arrival. When the palace maid who had been reprimanded saw this, she hurriedly took 2 steps back and said excitedly, "Your Highness." After the prince consort entered the palace, he immediately dismounted and couldn't wait to marry Your Highness. Actually, there was still some distance between the palace gates and Huayang Palace Hall. She said this to highlight Jiang Yuqing's love for Shang Wanwan. As expected, even the 2 old maids echoed her words. It seems that the prince consort is deeply in love with Your Highness. He can't wait to welcome you back. Shang Wanwan sneered in her heart when she heard this. Deeply in love? If they knew that Jiang Yuqing had fiercely slapped her yesterday, personally escorted her back, and even warned her for a long time, who knew if they would still be able to say such words? Shang Wanwan lifted her wrist and covered her head with the red veil. The dragon and phoenix embroidered veil fell down, covering her eyes that were filled with mockery. Chani walked over and helped her out of Huayang Palace Hall. Jiang Yuqing had already arrived outside the hall with his men. Under the gazes of countless people, Jiang Yuqing walked up and stood in front of Shang Wanwan, extending his hand. He said with a gentle expression, I've come to marry you." On the other side, everyone had already gathered in the plaza in front of Lang Kuan Palace Hall. This huge plaza was paved with white marble. At this moment, the officials of the imperial court were standing on the left side, while the important people of the various sects were standing on the right side. Apart from that, there were also black cavalry soldiers guarding in all directions. There was still a red carpet in the middle, and it extended all the way up, crossing the 9 steps and reaching the entrance of Lang Kuan Palace Hall. The reason why the wedding was held here and the coronation ceremony was because the Tianling scepter was enshrined in Lang Kuan Palace Hall. Everyone knew that this was the symbol of the Tianling Emperor's authority. To the people standing here, the wedding wasn't the highlight of the day. They were more concerned about whether Shangguan could successfully walk up the 9 steps, enter Lang Kuan Palace Hall, and pick up the Tianling scepter. The steps that went up were engraved with dragon patterns, which were majestic and dignified. Standing here, one seemed to be able to faintly feel the suppressive aura it contained. If this place was already like this, then the power of the Tianling scepter in Lang Kuan Palace Hall was naturally even more unimaginable. As expected of a grand ceremony, this lineup is really grand. The people from Dragon Teeth Mountain and Chongshu Pavilion stood next to each other, so Mu Hongyu ran over to Chu Luiyue and the rest. Seeing this, she couldn't help but speak softly. Yi Ranran blinked and said, "What's this? Hongyu, you haven't seen anything more powerful." Mu Hongyu was a little surprised. More powerful? This was Shangguan Wan's wedding and coronation ceremony. It was extremely grand. Logically speaking, this should be the highest standard. How could there be anything more powerful than this? Yes. Back then, Yi Ranran paused and looked around carefully. Then she lowered her voice and said, "Back then, when the Empress came of age, it was even grander than this. Later, when the Empress toured the borders, there was also the imperial court. Which one of them wasn't more powerful than this?" Mu Hongyu widened her eyes in shock. That Empress is really so powerful? Even the ceremony for her coming of age was even grander than this. How powerful must she be? Of course. After all, the 3rd princess is only a princess. How can she be compared to the Empress? Chu Luiyue listened from the side and smiled, but she didn't say anything. At this moment, a melodious horn sounded. The 3rd princess has arrived. The prince consort has arrived. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 865. A voice full of energy rang out and instantly spread throughout the entire Lang Kuan Palace. Everyone in the square in front of the palace heard the voice and looked over. They saw 2 people coming in hand from the magnificent palace gate. The person on the left was Jiang Yuqing. He was wearing a red robe today, and his collar and cuffs were embroidered with dark dragon patterns. There was a green jade belt around his waist that was as wide as a finger joint. At first glance, he was really handsome. Disregarding everything else, just her appearance alone was top-notch. Our prince consort is really outstanding and elegant. No wonder the 3rd princess is so in love with him and wants to marry him no matter what. Hey, don't you think about it? That Jiang Yuqing was someone who caught the eye of the Empress. Naturally, ordinary people can't be compared to him. That's true. Even if you look at the whole West Hill, among the younger generation, he can be considered the top in all aspects, right? Everyone was discussing animatedly. However, at this moment, a somewhat abrupt voice suddenly came from the crowd. He's just a vile person who's trying to make his own camp. No matter how good his skin is, it's still unbearably ugly. The person who spoke didn't deliberately lower his voice, and the strength of the people present wasn't weak, so almost everyone heard it clearly. The originally noisy crowd suddenly quieted down, and everyone looked in the direction of the voice. They wanted to see who was so bold to dare to say such words at this time and place. Chu Luiyue heard this and slightly raised his eyes, then was slightly startled. The person who spoke was a middle-aged man. He was tall and very burly and his skin was dark. He stood there like a small mountain that could move. However, what attracted attention wasn't his appearance, but the black armor he was wearing. There was a long sword at his waist. He was clearly a general. In the entire Tianling dynasty, there were very few people who could openly carry a sword into the palace. Of course, the most important thing was that he was standing in front of the officials, showing his high status. When they saw that it was this man who spoke, some people who originally wanted to watch the show quickly withdrew their gazes. TSK, they actually forgot about this killing god. He was the commander of the Black Cavalry, Meng Jingji. Speaking of this person, he was extremely famous. Almost everyone in the Tianling dynasty, regardless of their age, knew that this valiant general had been stationed at Xizjiang for decades and had made outstanding military achievements. Although he did not return to the West Hill often, his name was still enough to intimidate people. If it wasn't for the fact that the 3rd princess wanted to ascend the throne, he wouldn't have rushed back. Now that Jiang Yuqing was in control of the court and held great power, the only person who dared to publicly insult him like this was probably Meng Jingji, who held military power. General Meng, what do you mean? Jiang Lizuo was the Grand Tutor, one of the 3 dukes. He also stood in front of the officials, only a few steps away from Meng Jingji. When he heard this, his expression immediately turned ugly. Meng Jingji sneered. Not only did he not back down in the slightest, he continued to speak. What? Did I say something wrong? If he still had any feelings for the Empress concubine, why would he do such a thing? Why did he have to be with the third princess of all people? Thinking of how the Empress concubine had treated him and the third princess, it had not even been 3 years since she passed away, and the two of them were so impatient to get married. How ridiculous. If it was in Shijiang, anyone who dared to do such a thing would definitely have their head chopped off by Man Huangzi. He was originally a military general who had been on the battlefield all year round. His whole body carried a strong murderous aura, which was extremely cold. In addition, he really couldn't stand this matter, so his tone was even more fierce and imposing. Even the few officials standing behind him unconsciously took 2 steps back, afraid that they would be implicated. Jiang Lizhua didn't expect him to speak so bluntly and harshly. For a moment, his face turned pale with anger. Meng Jingji, you're impudent. You're humiliating the third princess. Yuan Wei, who was next to him, calmly stepped forward and stood between the two of them. He smiled with a gentle expression and said, Okay, they'll be here soon. How ugly would it be if you make a big fuss at this time? Calm down. Jiang Yuqing was so angry that his hands were trembling. It was clearly Meng Jingji who started it first. After he finished scolding, he was satisfied. But he didn't let anyone refute him? Those words just now were clearly heard by all the people in the surroundings. Meng Jingji looked at him condescendingly. Hey, this matter was done by them. This general was just telling the truth. How did it become a humiliation? It seems that Jiang Lizhua also knows how ugly this matter is if it gets out. Meng Jingji, don't be so rampant. Jiang Lizhua was so angry that he wanted to immediately go forward and beat Meng Jingji up. But Meng Jingji was one of the top experts of the Tianling dynasty. If he went forward, he would only be asking for trouble. On the side, Yuan Wei stopped him while giving Meng Jingji a meaningful glance. General Meng, in the end, it's His Highness's big day. Please don't say too much. Just treat it as giving me face. Meng Jingji finally stopped talking. Countless gazes looked over, and Jiang Lizhua only felt his face burning. He held it in for a long time and finally spat out a sentence with great difficulty. If you have the guts, then say these words in front of the third princess. This old man wants to see how arrogant you can be after today. This is the way of the ruler and minister, do you understand? Meng Jingji disagreed and smiled coldly. This general has always been loyal to Tianling. Ruler? Not to mention that His Majesty was still alive. Even if he had passed away, it was still unknown whether third Princess Shangguanwan could raise the Tianling scepter. At this point, this small farce had finally subsided. However, the reactions of the surrounding people were different. Some were envious, some were happy, some were disdainful, and some were mocking. Although Meng Jingji was a bit suspicious of having an army for his own sake, what he said just now wasn't completely unreasonable. Jiang Yuqing was previously engaged to the Empress concubine, and it was even time to hold the wedding. He didn't expect that something would happen to the Empress concubine, and everything would change. Until now, it had actually been less than 2 years since the Empress concubine's death. Jiang Yuqing and Shangguanwan's wedding really made people feel that it was inappropriate. However, not many people dared to say this. Now that Meng Jingji had caused a ruckus, the atmosphere immediately became very awkward. The surrounding space seemed to have become a bit colder, as if it was frozen. Chu Luiwei glanced at Meng Jingji, her heart filled with mixed feelings. Because she never thought that Meng Jingji would actually speak up for her. In her impression, she had only seen Meng Jingji a few times, and he always had a dark face and looked very fierce. In addition, she had supported Mu Qinghe to be the deputy general of the Black Cavalry, so to a certain extent, she had divided up Meng Jingji's power. She had always thought that Meng Jingji didn't have a good impression of her. She didn't expect that. The newcomer has arrived. Give your first greeting, ascend the steps of the 9th heaven. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 866. At this moment, Jiang Yuqing and Shangguanwan had already walked over hand in hand and stood in the middle of the square in front of the hall. All the discussions had dissipated at this moment. Countless gazes were focused on the two of them. Shangguanwan was also dressed splendidly today. Her bright red phoenix tail trailed behind her. With every step she took, the golden threads buried in the cloud brocade material sparkled. Even though she was still covered with a veil and no one could see her appearance, just by looking at her attire, they could tell that she was very luxurious. Next, the two of them would walk up the 9 steps together and formally bow in front of Lankuan Hall. Logically speaking, since His Majesty was still alive, he should be waiting for the two of them in front of the door. However, because he was still unconscious, this step was omitted. Jiang Yuqing and Shang Guanwan held hands tightly and stood side by side, looking like a perfect couple. Let's go. Jiang Yuqing tilted his head slightly with a smile on his face. His voice was also very gentle. It was as if the woman beside him was the love of his life. Shang Guanwan nodded lightly. No one could see her expression at this moment. The two of them walked forward hand in hand. Shang Guanwan took the lead and stepped onto the first step. Jiang Yuqing deliberately fell back half a step to show his respect. No one could find fault with his every word and action. Shang Guanwan continued to walk up and stepped onto the second step. At this point, one could already feel the faint pressure spreading from the Lankuan palace. However, this was nothing to Shang Guanwan and Jiang Yuqing. The two of them walked up step by step, and the pressure on their bodies also became heavier and heavier. Every time they walked up a step, they needed to mobilize more force to resist this increasingly stronger force. When they reached the 7th step, Shang Guanwan felt a little powerless. Although she was now at the early stage of the 7th rank, she had just recovered her Yuan meridian after all, and the strength she could display was not that strong. His entire body felt like it was filled with lead, incomparably heavy. Jiang Yuqing, who was by the side, quickly noticed that something was amiss with Shang Guanwan. During this period of time, he relied on some methods to barely recover his strength to the peak of the 7th stage. Although it was a little better than Shang Guanwan, the pressure in the Lankuan palace was not to be underestimated. He secretly exerted more strength in his hand and sent Shang Guanwan to the 8th step. Shang Guanwan's legs trembled and her body swayed. Jiang Yuqing frowned inwardly and quickly supported her. Then he gritted his teeth and climbed to the 8th step. Standing here, he could clearly see that the door of Lankuan Hall was open. Usually the door to Lankuan Palace was tightly locked. Only during the coronation ceremony would the elders of the royal family work together to open it. Once this barrier was opened, the pressure of the Tianling scepter spread unstoppably in all directions. It was precisely because of this that Shang Guanwan and Jiang Yuqing encountered such a terrifying pressure. The closer they got, the more shocking the aura was. The people standing in the square below were also staring intently. When they saw that Shang Guanwan's footsteps seemed to be a little shaky, some people's expressions changed slightly. Did the third princess lose her footing just now? An extremely low voice came from the crowd. She was wearing a phoenix coronet and a robe with a wide skirt behind her. However, many people still saw her swaying just now. It shouldn't be, right? If she can't go up now, how can she raise the Tianling scepter? Someone retorted, but his tone was very uncertain. In the history of the Tianling dynasty, there were precedents of people who couldn't raise the Tianling scepter. After careful calculation, there were a total of 4 people. The final outcome of these people, without exception, was that they were all deprived of the right to inherit the imperial power and never had the chance to start over again. To them, this was an undeniable shame and humiliation. Even though they could retain their status as members of the imperial family and eat, wear, and use the same things as before, because of this failure, they would never be able to raise their heads again for the rest of their lives. Among the 4 people, 2 of them couldn't bear the pressure after the failure and chose to commit suicide. Another one was greedy for cultivation and ultimately suffered from chi deviation, severing his own Yuan meridian and dying. As for the last person, he never took a step out of the palace again and died in less than 3 years. It was obvious how important the matter of raising the Tianling scepter was to the heir to the throne. It was also because of this that every emperor would be especially careful when selecting their heirs. Most of them would be evaluated from a very young age based on their talents. They would first select a few with good conditions and focus on nurturing them. When they grew up, they would then select the best one. However, Shang Guanwan was never the one who was chosen and thought highly of. On one hand, it was because her birth mother's status was low and she wasn't valued since she was young. On the other hand, she had never displayed any amazing talents and was even more invisible. Most importantly, ever since Shang Guanyu was born and found to have the Tianjing Yuan meridian, the current emperor had directly selected her and never thought of a second person. The Tianjing Yuan meridian that only appeared once in 1,000 years was extremely precious. It was actually very normal for the emperor to do this. However, no one would have thought that something would happen to her on the eve of her wedding. In the 2 years that followed, Jiang Yuqing and Shang Guanwan joined forces and gradually took control of the court. Other than Shang Guanwan, there was really no one more suitable than her. The countless gazes behind her made Shangguan feel as if there was a blade on her back. She knew that at this time, any small mistake would be infinitely magnified. She clenched her teeth and crazily circulated the force in her body. She tried to raise her leg and climb up the last step. However, it was as if there was a heavy weight on her legs and she couldn't move at all. She began to feel anxious. Her heart was burning with anxiety. If she couldn't even go up here, then wouldn't the back? At this moment, Jiang Yuqing injected a force into her body from her palm. Shangguan instantly felt much more relaxed and hurriedly raised her leg and took this step. Jiang Yuqing followed closely behind. The two of them held their hands tightly and, one in front and one behind, finally climbed up the last step. Stepping on the ground, Shangguan finally heaved a sigh of relief in her heart. In front of the Longquan Hall, 6 royal elders lined up in a row and respectfully waited for the two of them to arrive. Actually, there should have been 8 of them. Unfortunately, Elder Qiushi and Elder Duanmu Chun had both died in Dahuang Swamp previously, so there were only 6 people left now. The elder standing at the side took a step forward and concentrated his qi in his dantian. His voice was like a large bell that spread far and wide. First, bow to the heavenly Tao. Shangguan and Jiang Yuqing turned around and bowed to heaven and earth. Second, bow to the heavenly order. The two of them turned around again and bowed to the Longquan Hall. The celestial emperors bowed to each other. The two of them stood facing each other. In an instant, Shangguan's mind went blank. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 867. She had been waiting for this day for far too long. She had thought that they would finally get married, but in reality, the man in front of her had never liked her in the slightest. The music of the ceremony drifted over. At this moment she was the center of attention, high and mighty. She had thought that she would be elated on this day. But when it really came to this moment, she suddenly felt empty. Thinking of that painting, her hands couldn't help but tremble, and endless hatred surged in her heart. Jiang Yuqing was about to bend down, but he saw that Shangguan didn't seem to have any intention of moving. A trace of coldness flashed across his eyes, but it disappeared in an instant. Then he gently and softly called out to her. There was a smile on his face and his voice was very gentle, as if he was afraid of disturbing something. But the look in his eyes was so cold. At this moment, Shangguan couldn't see his face clearly, and could only see a faint outline. But when she heard his voice, Shangguan's heart trembled unconsciously, and she felt a little scared. The fierce and cold way he treated her yesterday was still clearly engraved in her mind. She suppressed the emotions in her heart, closed her eyes and finally bowed down for the last time. Seeing that she was obedient, Jiang Yuqing felt a lot more at ease, and almost bowed to her at the same time. The old man cheered. The ceremony is over. The crowd immediately cheered and celebrated. Firecrackers and fireworks were set off. The huge square was extraordinarily lively. But all of this sounded incomparably ironic to Shangguan's ears. Every word of celebration, every blessing at this moment, seemed to have become a curse to her. What love, what sincerity, what deep love between husband and wife. It was all a joke. She had waited so long for this day and worked so hard for so long, but in the end she had married a man who had never cared about her. And this man had even proposed to another woman the day before their wedding. It was only because that woman was somewhat similar to the Shangguan he had studied for 10 years. Were finally together. A doting smile appeared on Jiang Yuqing's handsome face. He walked forward and lifted Shangguan's veil. Today Shangguan wore exquisite makeup and a phoenix hairpin in her hair, looking luxurious and beautiful. Standing next to Jiang Yuqing they were a perfect match. The third princess and the prince consort are truly a match made in heaven. Yes. Whether it's family background, appearance or anything else, there's really nothing more compatible than this. The crowd was in an uproar. It was as if everyone was overjoyed. Is this considered a success? Mu Hongyu glanced at it and couldn't help but frown. She moved closer to Chu Liwei and whispered, Liu, don't you think the two of them are weird? What was strange about it? That's right. Oh, I don't know what to say. Anyway, I just feel that the two of them don't seem very happy. Although they're standing together, they seem to be a little distant from each other. In short, it's a little strange. They don't seem to be a good match. It wasn't that she hadn't seen people get married before. Although the occasion wasn't so grand, most of the people who got married were very affectionate. Just by looking at each other without saying anything, one could tell that they were really in love. However, Shangguan Wan and Jiang Yuqing didn't feel that way. Chu Luiyue smiled slightly. How are they not a good match? I think they're a match made in heaven. Seeing the two of them standing on the steps and bowing to get married, she felt a burst of joy in her heart. Fortunately, she didn't marry Jiang Yuqing back then. Otherwise, she would be disgusted for the rest of her life. Such a man was the best match for Shangguan Wan. On the stage, Shangguan Wan was also smiling. The two of them seemed to be very happy, but only they knew what they were thinking at the moment. Jiang Yuqing reached out and held Shangguan Wan's hand. Shangguan Wan felt cold all over and only felt disgusted in her heart. However, she didn't dare to forcefully break free and could only smile again. The two of them were equally matched in acting. For a moment, they confused many people who didn't know the inside story. In the eyes of most people, everything was going smoothly. The two of them standing on the steps were also harmonious and beautiful. At this moment, the old man who was singing the ceremony opened his mouth again. Please, Tianling Scepter. This voice was full of energy and echoed in the sky above Lang Kuan Palace for a long time. It was transmitted clearly to everyone's ears. Everyone's spirits were lifted. Immediately they focused their attention and looked over. The remaining 5 elders of the imperial family nodded and turned to enter Lang Kuan Palace. Countless eyes were focused on the door, eager and excited. They all knew that what was about to happen next was the real grand finale. Buzz! A deafening roar suddenly came from the Lang Kuan Palace. Many people were shocked and hurriedly used their force to set up a barrier in front of them. Swoosh! The elder who was singing the ceremony waved his sleeve and set up a silver barrier at the bottom of the steps, blocking this terrifying fluctuation. At this moment, the 5 elders finally walked out of Lang Kuan Palace. A huge square black crystal was moved out by the few of them. Then it sat on the ground. Bang! A muffled sound. Almost even the ground trembled fiercely. That black crystal was half the height of a person, and on top of it, there was a scepter floating quietly. The lustrous glow shrouded it, and its appearance couldn't be seen clearly, but its power was shocking. Although a barrier had been set up in front of them, the people in the palace still found it difficult to breathe. However, at this moment they couldn't care less. Everyone's eyes fell on that place. That was the symbol of the imperial power of the Tianling Empire, Tianling Scepter. The old man who was singing the ceremony knelt on one knee. Third princess, please use the scepter. Digression. 6 points. The Great Way of the Magic Doctor, 1/Grey Cutie Meng, 1v1 refreshing one without abuse. She went against the heavens to prove the devil's path. He cut through all obstacles just to protect her. He said, "You want the world, I want you." Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 868. The other 5 royal elders also knelt down and said in unison, "Third princess, please hold the scepter." Shangguan Wan looked at the Tianling scepter floating above the black crystal, took a deep breath and walked forward slowly. Finally, she stood a step away from the heavens-writ scepter. Everyone fell silent as they watched the scene unfold before them. As long as Shangguan Wan successfully held the Tianling scepter, she would be able to ascend the throne. From then on, she would wield the power of the Tianling dynasty. Thump thump. Thump thump. Shangguan Wan's heart was beating violently. It was almost shattering her eardrums. All the blood in her body seemed to be boiling, rushing through her limbs and bones. Because she was nervous, her palms were sweaty, and both her hands were wet and sticky. The Tianling scepter was extremely heavy. And the aura it contained was extremely powerful. After all, it was left behind by Taizu himself. Not to mention lifting it, just standing there made Shangguan Wan feel a tightness in her chest, and she almost knelt on the ground. To lift it, strength alone wasn't enough. At the same time, one had to have the bloodline of the Tianling royal family. Most importantly, one had to gain the Tianling scepter's approval. To any successor of the Tianling dynasty, this was a threshold that had to be crossed. If they succeeded, they would become a supreme existence above millions of people. If they failed, they would become the laughingstock of the world, and they would never be able to make a comeback. Shangguan Wan kept persuading herself in her heart. I can do it, I definitely can. She had made thorough preparations for today, and there was no way she would fail. It was already noon and the sky was clear and cloudless. The scorching sun shone down. And at this moment, Shangguan Wan became the focus of countless people's attention. Finally, she slowly reached out and reached for the Tianling scepter. Buzz. When it was still half an arm away from the Heaven's Order scepter, a buzzing sound suddenly spread out from it. The Tianling scepter, which was covered in a layer of faint light, suddenly released a powerful aura. Shangguan was the first to bear the brunt of it, and she immediately took a step back from the impact. She was shocked and quickly stabilized her body. Her feet were nailed to the ground. Fortunately, she reacted in time, and the impact this time did not affect her too much. But in the end, under everyone's watchful eyes, he still took a step back. For a time, the huge square became even quieter. One had to know that at this moment, Shangguan's performance was seen by countless people. Elder Qin Ku, who was singing the ceremony, also frowned slightly. He was the most senior of the royal family elders, a true veteran of 3 dynasties. He had seen such an occasion 3 times, and this was already the 4th time. In his impression, the first 3 enthronement ceremonies had gone very smoothly. As the symbol of imperial power, the Tianling scepter was a sacred item that the entire dynasty worshipped. It also had spirituality. In the past, during the process of holding the scepter, the Tianling scepter would naturally emit a powerful aura, but it would only do so when the successor tried to pick it up from the black crystal. However, just now Shangguan's hand had not even touched the Tianling scepter, and it had already caused such a commotion. Elder Qin Ku felt uneasy and felt that something was amiss. Shangguan thought to herself that it was a close call. She almost fell down just now. However, the Tianling scepter seemed to be more difficult to control than expected. Just getting close to it was already so difficult. Who knew how difficult it would be to try to lift it? She pursed her lips and channeled the force in her body to her right hand. Immediately after, she took another step forward. This time she was even more cautious than before. She used her force to wrap her hand completely and reached for the Tianling scepter. Buzz! The Tianling scepter trembled slightly. The commotion was even greater. Fortunately, Shangguan had suffered a loss previously. This time she clenched her teeth and decided to endure it. The closer she got, the stronger the aura became. Her entire right hand felt like it was about to be crushed. Shangguan's face was pale, and her hand was trembling slightly. However, she still resolutely moved forward. Today, no matter what, she had to succeed. Elder Qin Ku watched from the side, and the feeling that something was wrong grew stronger. Strange. Why did the Tianling scepter seem to be very resistant to Shangguan? He had never seen such a situation before. He frowned anxiously. It wouldn't be good if this went on. It would be extremely difficult for Shangguan to pick it up. The other elders from the royal family who were standing nearby also sensed something. They looked at each other in unison and secretly exchanged glances. Logically speaking, Shangguan had royal blood running through her veins. Her talent and strength were also not bad. She should be able to succeed smoothly. However, judging from the current situation, it seemed that Jiang Yuqing stood behind Shangguan, only 10 steps away from her. Although he couldn't see Shangguan's expression from here, he could already tell many things from her reaction. His heart was also in his mouth. Everyone at the bottom of the stairs watched this scene nervously. Chu Luiyue looked up slightly. From here he could see half of Shangguan's face. Her expression wasn't very good. It seemed that lifting the Tianling scepter wasn't that easy for her. Finally, after a long and painful torture, Shangguan's hand finally reached into the layer of light and grabbed the Tianling scepter. In an instant, a bone-chilling aura surged out from within. Shangguan clearly saw that her entire right hand was instantly covered in frost. Moreover, that layer of ice seemed to be spreading outwards. She was shocked and hurriedly circulated her force to block that icy aura outside. However, her right hand was already red and swollen from the cold. She couldn't feel anything at all. The Heavenly Order scepter was forged by the great ancestor using the 1,000-year-old ice bone wood from the extreme cold of the northern border. This kind of 1,000-year ice bone wood wasn't a real tree. It was formed by condensing the force of heaven and earth and freezing into a tree-like stalactite. It was rumored that it would only grow an inch every 100 years. One could only imagine how terrifying the energy it contained was. Shangguan only felt that the chill seemed to have silently spread from her palm to her entire body. For a moment she almost thought that she was going to become an ice sculpture. She knew that she had to pick it up as soon as possible. Otherwise, if this torture continued, she was afraid that her entire body would be crippled. Thinking of this, Shangguan gritted her teeth and circulated all the force in her body. She gripped the Tianling scepter tightly and exerted force. "Rise!" Shangguan shouted clearly. However, she was shocked to find that the Tianling scepter didn't move at all. It was still quietly floating above the black crystal. No matter how she controlled the abundant origin power to attack it, it didn't move at all. In front of Lang Kuan Palace, everyone who was nervously watching this scene was stunned. Someone quietly said, "Did this fail? Is this a failure?" A better reading experience came from the Love Network. Chapter 869. It was so quiet that even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. This whisper was especially clear. Instantly, it was like a drop of water falling into a pot of oil. The crowd started to stir and many people looked at each other. This did seem to be a little strange. Looking at Shangguanwan's appearance, she should have used all her strength. But the Tianling scepter did not move at all. It can't be. Isn't the third princess a 7th-level fighter? Logically speaking, she should be able to do it. But the Tianling scepter did not move. If the third princess really can't do it today, it will be too embarrassing. The low voices of discussion reached Shangguanwan's ears, and every word made her feel even more embarrassed and tormented. She clenched her teeth and tried again. But the Tianling scepter still showed no signs of moving. The noise below gradually grew louder. The few elders of the imperial family beside him also gradually had a trace of suspicion on their faces. Shangguanwan's heart beat violently, as if it was going to jump out of her chest. In a short time, her forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. The Tianling scepter in her hand was bone-chillingly cold, but it was not as cold as her heart now. It was as if a basin of ice water was poured over her head. She couldn't help but shudder. She started to tremble. Why was the Tianling scepter not moving? She had risked her life to restore her Yuan meridian. Although it was not the best, it was still at the level of the earth scripture. In addition, she had painstakingly accumulated this strength. How could she not be able to lift the Tianling scepter? Shangguanwan became more and more anxious. But the more anxious she was, the more flustered she became. She wanted to gather all the strength in her body and try again, but for some reason her limbs went soft and she could not exert any strength. But she did not dare to let go. That would be admitting that she could not do it. So Shangguanwan held the Tianling scepter and did not move. Actually, she had been trying to move but to no avail. So in the eyes of the surrounding people, it looked like she was standing there stiffly. Time seemed to pass very slowly at this moment. The few elders from the imperial family looked at each other and saw the worry in each other's eyes. The gentle smile on Jiang Yuqing's face could no longer be maintained. If Shangguanwan was unable to pick up the scepter today, she would not be able to ascend the throne. More importantly, she would never have the chance to try a second time. In that case, he would also be greatly implicated. At that time, all the previous efforts would be in vain. He no longer had the chance to find a third royal princess to marry. Don't be nervous. Take it slow. Jiang Yuqing finally couldn't help but open his mouth. At first glance, his expression seemed quite calm, but if one looked closely, they would see the anxiety and worry in his eyes. Shangguanwan looked back at him. She knew very well that Jiang Yuqing wasn't encouraging her, but warning her. She fails. At the thought of the terrifying consequences, Shangguanwan pursed her lips and looked at the Tianling scepter in front of her again. With his current strength, he was afraid that it would be impossible. Then, "Senior, could you please help me?" Shangguanwan asked in her heart. After a moment, that cold and indifferent voice sounded. "Just as I thought, although your Yuan meridian has recovered, it's still lacking something. After all, your Yuan meridian's grade was not very good to begin with, and after it was destroyed by the flames of the Tianjing Yuan meridian, it was even worse. It was already very difficult for you to recover to your current state." The voice was very calm when he said these words, as if he was narrating a very ordinary matter. But in Shangguanwan's ears, it didn't sound like that at all. She felt that he was mocking her. A deep resentment grew in her heart. If not for Shangguanyu, she wouldn't be in such a difficult position now. "Your Highness, do you still want to continue?" Seeing that Shangguanwan didn't move, Elder Chen Ke finally couldn't help but ask carefully. The moment he said that, everyone quieted down again and looked at Shangguanwan with different expressions. If she continued, she might not succeed and she might even be mocked for being incompetent. But if she gave up just like that, it would mean that Shangguanwan had completely failed. Not to mention ascending the throne, even if she lived as the third princess, her life might not be any better. Those who had failed before didn't have good endings. Shangguanwan immediately said. "Of course." Seeing how resolute she was, Elder Chen Ku wanted to say something but stopped. Actually, according to his past experience, Shangguanwan was destined to fail. But since she wanted to continue, he couldn't say anything. "Third princess, please?" Elder Chen Ku's expression became much more serious. If Shangguanwan still couldn't do it this time, then they really had to consider many things in the future. Shangguanwan nodded slightly and frowned slightly. Senior. Suddenly, a chuckle sounded beside her ear. Then Shangguanwan felt a flash in front of her eyes. A vigorous aura suddenly erupted from her body. In an instant, like a river bursting its banks, an endless amount of force surged. A black rune appeared between Shangguanwan's eyebrows and disappeared in an instant. Due to the special position she was standing in and the fact that the rune flashed too quickly, no one noticed it. Then, a storm seemed to be brewing in the depths of her eyes. Cold. Sinister. It was as if she had become a completely different person. Then she clenched her fists and tried to raise the Tianling scepter again. Buzz. A roar sounded. It shone brightly. In the next moment, the Tianling scepter finally moved. Shangguanwan's mouth twitched. It seemed to be small, but there was a hint of stiffness in it. The black crystal was instantly filled with colorful lights. And the Tianling scepter started to move slowly along with Shangguanwan's movements. It moved. The Tianling scepter moved. Someone exclaimed in surprise. The crowd became noisy again. Almost everyone rushed to look, afraid that they would miss something. Seeing Shangguanwan slowly pick up the Tianling scepter, the stone in Elder Chenku's heart was finally put down. The other elders also nodded and secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Jiang Yuqing's tightly clenched fists in his sleeves relaxed a little. It's good that she succeeded, it's good that she succeeded. Many people's faces were filled with amazement. The Tianling scepter is really not easy to deal with. The third princess only succeeded after trying so many times. So it's considered a success, right? From now on she will officially ascend to the throne. Boom. At this moment, a huge explosion suddenly sounded from the Tianling scepter. A terrifying wave spread in all directions. Shangguanwan's eyes flashed with shock. Before she could react, an unparalleled aura came toward her. Shangguanwan's body instantly flew backward. Bang! She fell heavily and rolled down the 9 flights of stairs. The crowd was in an uproar. However, at this moment, the Tianling scepter suddenly flew in a certain direction. Chu Luiyue seemed to have sensed something. She looked up and saw the Tianling scepter flying toward her. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 870. Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. The Tianling scepter was extremely fast, leaving a straight silver trail in the air. In an instant, it had already flown out of Lang Kuan Palace. It tore through the air and let out a sharp whistle. The sound of something breaking could be heard. Everyone looked over and was shocked to find that the barrier that Elder Chenku had set up had been easily pierced. One must know that Elder Chenku was an 8th-level pinnacle fighter. One could only imagine how strong the barrier's defensive power was. But in front of the Tianling scepter, it was like a thin piece of paper that was instantly pierced. Countless people looked up anxiously, their eyes following the Tianling scepter. It flew across the sky and headed straight for the crowd. An astonishing pressure spread out, and many people subconsciously retreated backward. Quick! Retreat! The power of the Tianling scepter was not something that they could easily withstand. Everyone was shocked and panicked. The few elders of the imperial family who were standing on the steps were also panicking when they saw this scene. Elder Chenku, what should we do? Should we think of a way to stop the Tianling scepter? Elder Chenku clenched his fists tightly and the wrinkles on his face seemed to have increased. Stop it. Easy for you to say. Even if the few of them joined forces, they might not be able to completely control the Tianling scepter. Furthermore, this thing seemed to have gone crazy for it to suddenly cause such a ruckus. He had witnessed 3 enthronement ceremonies but had never seen such a scene. But these were only thoughts in his heart. The situation was chaotic now. If they could not control it in time, the consequences would be unimaginable. Elder Chenku pondered for a moment and made a prompt decision. Quick! Activate the black magnetite. The black magnetite was the black crystal that held the Tianling scepter. There was a top-grade Xian formation carved on it and it was specially used to suppress the Tianling scepter. Usually, the Xian formation on the black magnetite was activated and the Tianling scepter was in a state of deep sleep. Only during special times like this would they deactivate the Xian formation on the black magnetite. Once the heir to the imperial family successfully picked up the Tianling scepter and received its approval, the Xian formation on the black magnetite would be activated when it was placed back. But they did not expect that this time they would have to do it. The elders hesitated for a moment. Once it was activated again, the black profound stone and the heaven-writ scepter would not be able to touch each other for a short period of time. At that time, the selection of a new emperor would have to be delayed. However, the heaven-writ scepter seemed to have slipped out of his control. Perhaps this was the only way. The few of them looked at each other and nodded resolutely. With a move of their bodies, they stood around the black mysterious stone and surrounded it. One of them stretched out his hand, and several rays of silver origin power flew out. Open. Wait. Elder Chinku suddenly cried out in alarm. The few elders quickly stopped and saw that Elder Chinku was looking in a certain direction with a shocked expression. They subconsciously looked over and couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The originally orderly and lively crowd seemed to have been split from the middle by an invisible sharp sword. At the end of the crowd stood a woman in red. It was Chu Luiyue. However, the heavenly command scepter actually stopped a foot away from her. For a moment, time seemed to stop flowing, and the surrounding space froze inch by inch. Between heaven and earth there was complete silence. Everyone stared at this scene with their mouths agape. Their hearts were filled with shock and they were speechless. The heaven-writ scepter was extremely resistant to Shangguan and had mercilessly sent her flying. In the blink of an eye, it had arrived in front of Chu Luiyue. What was the meaning of this? After a short moment of shock, someone finally remembered Shangguan and stiffly turned around to look. At this moment, Shangguan had already rolled down the 9 steps. Perhaps because the energy fluctuation she had encountered earlier was too strong, she had struggled for a long time before she could stand up. However, at this moment she was really in a sorry state. There were several cuts on her face and hands and she was bleeding profusely. Her originally exquisite and beautiful makeup was now completely ruined. Her veil had long been pulled down, and her cloud-like hair was messy. A luxurious phoenix hairpin hung crookedly in a lock of hair. It was unknown whether it was because she had suffered internal injuries, but her face looked incomparably pale. There were some black marks between her brows and the corners of her lips, making her look extremely strange. No one could have imagined that the third Princess Shangguan, who was still glamorous and lofty just a moment ago, would end up in such a state. Some people gradually regained their senses, and their expressions became very complicated. If they remembered correctly, Shangguan seemed to have been sent flying by the heaven-writ scepter's power just now, right? This was no longer a matter of whether she could pick up the heaven-writ scepter or not. This was a matter of enmity with the heaven-writ scepter. Although there had been chances of failure in the past, something like this had never happened before. As the third princess, Shangguan was a true Tianling royal bloodline. Such an action was no different from giving her a ruthless slap in front of so many people. Shangguan also felt extremely embarrassed. Her limbs were cold and the blood in her body seemed to have frozen. Only her face was burning with pain. At this moment, everyone's gazes seemed to be filled with mockery and ridicule. Her mind kept replaying the scene just now, and she couldn't help but want to find a hole to hide in. Completely disappear. How are you? Jiang Yuqing reacted quickly and immediately walked over to Shangguan's side as he asked with furrowed brows. Shangguan was just about to speak when the blood in her chest surged, and she actually spat out a mouthful of blood. Jiang Yuqing was standing right beside her, and a lot of the blood splattered on him. His brows furrowed, but he still reached out to support Shangguan. Shangguan couldn't be bothered with him at this moment. After spitting out the blood, she still stubbornly and quickly raised her head to look at Chu Luiyue and the crowd. Why is the heaven-writ scepter? She spat out a few words with difficulty, her eyes staring straight ahead. The hatred in her eyes was like a knife, as if she wanted to cut Chu Luiyue into pieces. Jiang Yuqing also looked over with furrowed brows. How could he not be curious? In fact, at this very moment, everyone who saw this scene both inside and outside of the huge Langkuan Hall was similarly puzzled. When did Chu Luiyue have anything to do with the Tianling scepter? Why did it fly towards her out of nowhere? Especially when compared to Shangguan, this scene looked even more strange. Jiang Yuqing's expression was grave. This Tianling scepter is extremely dangerous. Be careful. Before he finished speaking, the Tianling scepter seemed to have understood. It suddenly retracted the murderous aura around it and moved forward. It seemed to be trying to curry favor and act coquettishly. It gently poked Chu Luiyue's face. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 871. Jiang Yuqing's remaining words were stuck in his throat, and he almost choked to death. The expression on his face changed. How exciting. When the crowd saw this scene, they didn't react any better than Jiang Yuqing. They were all stunned. What was going on? Wasn't the Tianling scepter supposed to be majestic and inviolable? Wasn't it supposed to be that only the one who raised the Tianling scepter could wield imperial power and ascend to the top? Why did it suddenly become like this? The Tianling scepter was very domineering just a moment ago, sending the third princess flying. In the next second it actually, in front of Chu Luiyue. Wasn't this too strange? The surroundings were extremely quiet. Countless pairs of eyes landed on Chu Luiyue with different expressions. Chu Luiyue was actually shocked herself. When she saw the Tianling scepter flying towards her, she had already guessed something in her heart. She just didn't expect it to treat her even more intimately than expected. Yes, intimately. When it flew in front of her and poked her face, the first thought that came to Chu Luiyue's mind was, the Tianling scepter seems to like her very much. This feeling came out of nowhere, but it was very real. Chu Luiyue blinked and looked at the Tianling scepter in front of her. At this moment, it was still enveloped in a layer of faint light. However, because it was very close to her, she could roughly see what it looked like. It was a cylindrical scepter that was completely black. It was wide at the top and narrow at the bottom, and it was about 3 feet long. There seemed to be a dragon's head carved on the top, and the tail was sharper and seemed to be carved with some kind of pattern. Even though it had already restrained its aura, she could still vaguely feel the vast and majestic aura that seemed to come from an ancient time and space. Chu Luiyue could clearly feel that the Tianling scepter was indeed coming for her. For a moment, an impulse surged in her heart, and she almost reached out to grab it. However, she didn't forget where she was, and she also didn't forget that there were countless pairs of eyes staring at her. Just as she was about to suppress the thoughts in her heart, a sharp voice filled with anger suddenly rang out. Chu Luiyue, how dare you? This shout was extremely ear-piercing, and it instantly caused many people to be jolted awake. Chu Luiyue also looked over. The person who spoke was Shang Wanwan. At this moment she was glaring at Chu Luiyue furiously. Her eyes were wide open and she looked furious. The Tianling scepter is a sacred object that the Tianling dynasty has worshipped for thousands of years. It is the symbol of imperial power. How can I allow you to defile me like this? Many people's expressions instantly changed. As long as one wasn't blind, they could clearly see that the heaven's writ scepter had flown towards Chu Luiyue of its own accord. It had also approached Chu Luiyue of its own accord. From the beginning to the end, Chu Luiyue stood in his position and did nothing. Shang Wanwan said that she had defiled the heavenly writ scepter. Isn't that a bit of a distortion of the truth? Chu Luiyue raised her brows slightly. Instead of being angry, she smiled and said softly, "Third princess, do you mean that I was the one who summoned the heaven's writ scepter and controlled it to do all those things just now?" Shang Wanwan choked. If she said yes, wouldn't that mean that she had admitted that the heaven's writ scepter was controlled by a mere Chu Luiyue? If word got out, wouldn't the imperial family lose face? But if she said that it wasn't the heaven's writ scepter, why did it suddenly become so strange? It had rejected her approach and even injured her directly. But in the blink of an eye, it was so docile in front of Chu Luiyue. Even in the thousands of years of the Tianling dynasty's history, nothing like this had ever happened before. The most embarrassing thing was that the heaven's writ scepter was still quietly floating beside Chu Luiyue. It was as if it was set on following her and had no intention of returning. She was going to pick up the heaven's writ scepter. What was she going to do now? Shang Wanwan's heart was filled with hatred. Chu Luiyue again. The night before, Jiang Yuqing poured out his heart to her and took the initiative to ask for her hand in marriage. Now, even the heaven's writ scepter had taken the initiative to follow him and stay by his side. Who knows if you use some kind of trick? Shang Wanwan was almost blinded by anger. She pointed at Chu Luiyue and wanted to scold her, but Jiang Yuqing quickly stopped her. Calm down. He grabbed Shang Wanwan's hand tightly and gave her a warning look. She should take a look at herself first. If she lost control of her emotions again and made a scene, it would be over. Shang Wanwan bit her lip hard to control her emotions. Jiang Yuqing looked deeply at Chu Luiyue and the heaven's writ scepter in front of her. His mind was also in a mess. "Elder Qinku," he called out. "You have always been in charge of looking after the heaven's writ scepter. Do you know what is going on?" Elder Qinku, who was called out, immediately walked over with a worried expression. This humble subject doesn't know what is going on either. The heaven's writ scepter rarely leaves the black mystic stone. You are the leader of the 8 great elders of the royal family and are personally in charge of these matters. If even you don't know, then who else can? Jiang Yuqing's tone turned cold. No matter what, you must bring the heaven's writ scepter back. If you delay the third princess's ascension ceremony, you will be held accountable. Elder Qinku also cried out in his heart. What did this have to do with him? Not to mention that the Heaven's Writ Scepter had taken the initiative to look for Chu Luiyue and no one could do anything about it. Even if Chu Luiyue wasn't here, would Shangguan be able to lift it? Everything that had happened just now was still vivid in his mind. The Heaven's Writ Scepter was full of resistance toward Shangguan and wasn't even willing to let her touch it. Not to mention anything else. It would even delay her ascension ceremony. That would require her to have the ability to ascend the throne. Without the Heaven's Writ Scepter's approval, today's ceremony couldn't possibly continue. Elder Chinku's expression turned a little pale at this thought. Prince Consort, it's true that we are in charge of guarding the Heaven's Writ Scepter, but we have never been able to control it. Please forgive my incompetence, but I may not be able to do as you say. Jiang Yuqing immediately became anxious. Shangguan was even angrier when she heard this. She immediately raised her voice and pointed at Chu Luiyue. No matter what, you must bring the Heaven's Writ Scepter back to the Black Mystic Stone. Otherwise, how can I continue? Elder Chinku clasped his hands together and bowed. He said word by word, he said each word clearly. Third Princess, you know that the Heaven's Writ Scepter is a sacred item that has been passed down for thousands of years and has its own spirituality. If it acknowledges you, it will naturally agree to your request. No matter where it is, you will be able to lift it. It doesn't have to be on the Black Mystic Stone. However, if it doesn't acknowledge you, then even we can't do anything about it. Shangguan's face flushed red. Was he openly saying that she didn't have the right to inherit the throne? She clenched her fists and looked at Chu Luiyue. I order you to return the Heaven's Command Scepter immediately. I order you to return the Heaven's Command Scepter immediately. Chapter 872. This scene was simply too absurd and laughable. Shangguan was clearly the one with the royal bloodline and the heir to the throne, but now she was coldly reprimanding Chu Luiyue, who had nothing to do with her, and demanding that she return the Tianling scepter. If word got out, who knew how many people would laugh their heads off? Chu Luiyue was calm and composed as she lifted her chin. Third Princess, I did not take the Tianling scepter for myself, so how can I return it? If you want it back, why don't you come and get it yourself? Shangguan choked as her face flushed red. If it was really as easy as Chu Luiyue said, why would she have such a headache? This Tianling scepter was indeed a little strange. It had been very resistant to her from the start. Just now, when she asked the senior for help, she was directly blasted out and rolled down the 9 steps in front of everyone. Now she did not dare to try again. She did not dare to imagine what would happen if the same thing happened a second time. But if she did not do anything, what would she do if the Tianling scepter really did not return? At this moment, it was still quietly floating in front of Chu Luiyue, as if it had become an item that she carried around with her. Jiang Yuqing gently pushed her. You are of royal bloodline after all. No matter what, the Tianling scepter should not do anything to you. You can go and ask for it yourself. Shangguan suddenly turned around and glared at him. Will not do anything to me? Did he not see the situation just now? She had already embarrassed herself once. If she failed again, she would lose all her face. But Jiang Yuqing's attitude was very firm. Aside from Shangguan, who else could take the initiative to help? Elder Chen Ku and the others were in charge of guarding the entire Longquan Palace and controlling the Xian array on the black magnetite. But they had clearly said that the Tianling scepter could not be controlled. Could it be that they were just going to watch? Shangguan gritted her teeth. Unable to persuade Jiang Yuqing, she could only take a step forward. She took a deep breath, looked at the oracle scepter, and tried to make her tone sound sincere. Junior Shangguan respectfully requests the return of the Heaven's Writ Scepter. As he spoke, the Tianling scepter remained motionless, as if it had no reaction at all. It had a certain level of intelligence, so naturally, it could understand Shangguan's words. As a result, the situation instantly became even more awkward. The onlookers quieted down with different expressions on their faces. The Heavenly Writ Scepter brushed him aside in disdain and ignored his request. After so many years, it seemed that Shangguan was the only one, right? In this awkward silence, even the air seemed to have frozen. Shangguan's face quickly turned red and then turned pale. Her body trembled slightly. He didn't know if it was because he was too angry or because he was too ashamed. In any case, at this moment, Shangguan deeply understood what it meant to be ashamed and unable to show her face. At this moment, Chu Luiyue's clear voice sounded, breaking the dead silence. Hey, the third princess is inviting you back. Chu Luiyue was speaking to the Tianling scepter. Although she also wanted to directly take the Tianling scepter in her hands, it didn't seem appropriate at this moment. The Tianling scepter finally moved after hearing her words. The fluorescent light around it flickered as if it was breathing. Then it actually flew directly to Chu Liyue's side and then struck the ground. But the end of the scepter landed on the white jade stone, making a soft sound. It was actually standing right beside Chu Liyue's leg, just a fist's distance away. As long as Chu Liyue stretched out his hand, he would be able to take it in his hand. Chu Liyue looked down and the corners of his eyes twitched. Was he afraid that the matter wasn't big enough? This seemed to be even more hurtful than her directly snatching it. There was nothing more embarrassing than this. The contrast was so stark and intense that it was impossible to ignore it. On one side, Shang Guanwan was pleading with the Tianling scepter to return, but the Tianling scepter ignored her. On the other side, Chu Liyue was persuading the Tianling scepter to leave, but the Tianling scepter insisted on staying by her side. Everyone could see clearly that the Tianling scepter wanted to stay by Chu Liyue's side. The two ladies faced each other in the hall, and the atmosphere was strange. No one would have thought that something like this would happen during the coronation ceremony. Shang Guanwan stared deadly at Chu Liyue. Oh, there must be something wrong here. There were so many people present, so why did the Tianling scepter choose Chu Liyue? She wouldn't believe that she didn't have any tricks up her sleeves. Chu Liyue, what do you want? The Tianling scepter is the sacred item of the entire dynasty. Even if you want to play tricks, you should know your limits. How can you think of something like this? Shang Guanwan clenched her fists and reprimanded her. It's fine that you snatched the divine beast back then, but now you won't even let go of the Tianling scepter left behind by the Taizu of the Shangguan family? You're too much. As soon as he said this, everyone was stunned. What did Shang Guanwan say? Snatch the divine beast? What was going on? Could it be that Chu Liyue snatched the divine beast that originally belonged to her? Chu Liyue's expression also calmed down. She looked at Shang Guanwan with a faint smile, and there seemed to be a cold glint in her eyes. What do you mean by that, third princess? Why don't I understand? Shang Guanwan sneered. Back then I went to the Dahuang swamp for Imperial Father. In the mystic forest, I happened to meet a demonic beast that was about to break through to the divine beast level. Unfortunately, there was a barrier outside and guards, so I couldn't get close. When I was fighting with that person, you took the opportunity to enter in contract with the demonic beast while it was going through the Tianlai tribulation. Many people have seen this. Do you still want to deny it? You snatched the divine beast, but I didn't pursue the matter because you were willing to use the divine beast's blood to treat Imperial Father. Being able to contract with that divine beast is also your ability. But this time you still want to use tricks to snatch the Tianling scepter. I won't allow it. Everyone was in an uproar. They had long heard that Chu Liyue had returned after contracting with a divine beast, but they didn't know that there were so many twists and turns in this matter. If what Shang Guanwan said was true, then Chu Liyue's actions were indeed not honorable. Seeing that the surrounding people seemed to be gradually siding with her, Shang Guanwan finally felt a little better. She let out a long sigh and said, I know that you come from a lowly background, so it's inevitable that you'll be greedy when you see something good. Whatever you want, I've already tried my best to satisfy you. I even gave up this divine beast to you. But you're still not satisfied. If you want something, you have to do it in an upright manner. Every time you use such despicable thoughts and methods, even if you get it, it won't truly belong to you. And you, how can you be at ease? Shang Guanwan was certain that Chu Liyue had used some tricks to make the Tianling scepter go crazy. Therefore, her words were very rude, mocking her both openly and secretly. When the surrounding people heard this, many of them also had doubts in their eyes. That's right. No matter how capable Chu Liyue was, this Tianling scepter couldn't have gone looking for her for no reason. Could it be that she really did something in secret? Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 873. Chu Liyue listened to her patiently. However, she didn't show any shame or disdain for being exposed. Instead, she smiled. She hadn't even told Shang Guanwan these words, but the other party had already made the accusation. Her ability to distort the truth was not lost at all. It seems that in the third princess's eyes, I'm really someone who knows everything. Not only can I contract divine beasts as I wish, but I can also use the Tianling scepter as I wish. She spoke coldly, and a smile suddenly appeared on her lips. Since the third princess thinks so highly of me, wouldn't I be letting down the third princess's good intentions if I don't do anything? Shangguan was originally quite pleased with herself. She thought that she had the upper hand and would force Chu Luiyue to back down. However, she felt uneasy after hearing what Lin Mingya said. Wasn't Chu Luiyue saying that she was belittling the Tianling scepter? I didn't mean it that way. Elder Qin Ku, there's something I'd like to ask. Chu Luiyue ignored Shangguan and turned to look at Elder Qin Ku. What? Elder Qin Ku didn't expect Chu Luiyue to suddenly speak to him and was stunned. Chu Luiyue glanced at the Tianling scepter beside her, and her red lips curved up into a deep smile. Just as the third princess said, the Tianling scepter is a sacred item of the Tianling dynasty. It's extremely honorable. It's rumored that whoever can pick up the Tianling scepter will successfully inherit the throne. What if I can do it? Elder Qin Ku's eyes widened in shock. Was Chu Luiyue crazy? Did she know what she was saying? Picking up the Tianling scepter, was she planning to openly usurp the throne? Impossible. Before Elder Qin Ku could react, Shangguan was the first to deny it. Even if you use some method to make the Tianling scepter lose control, you can't pick it up, much less gain its approval. Shangguan said this with great confidence. This was because the Tianling scepter had been left behind by Taizu. Since ancient times, only those with the Tianling royal bloodline could approach and obtain the Tianling scepter's recognition. What kind of background did Chu Luiyue have to have such thoughts? What wishful thinking. Oh, why don't we make a bet? Chu Luiyue was not annoyed and shrugged. Shangguan became vigilant. What bet? If I can pick up this scepter and obtain its approval, then, don't even think about it. Shangguan immediately interrupted her rudely. Chu Luiyue, with your background, do you think you can be related to the Tianling royal family? Don't even think about it. If Chu Luiyue dared to say that she wanted to use this to fight for the throne, she would immediately send people to arrest Chu Luiyue and sentence her to death for the crime of rebellion. Chu Luiyue chuckled. Third princess, why are you in such a hurry? I haven't finished. What I want to bet is that if I can do this, then please reinvestigate the death of the crown princess. There was a loud bang. Chu Luiyue's words were like thunder, exploding in everyone's ears. Countless people widened their eyes in shock and looked at her in disbelief. What did Chu Luiyue just say? She wanted to reinvestigate the death of the crown princess? What did that mean? Didn't the crown princess die because she went crazy during her cultivation? Reinvestigate? Could it be that there was something fishy about the death of the crown princess? There were actually many people who had doubts about this matter, but in the past 2 years, they had all stopped investigating because of various reasons. Gradually, no one mentioned this matter anymore. There were even some people who didn't know why, but they kept everything about the crown princess a secret. The woman who was once as dazzling as the sun in the clouds finally fell like a meteor, completely disappearing and returning to silence. Very few people mentioned her again. When Chu Luiyue said that she wanted to bet, many people guessed that she would ask for something. But no matter how much they thought about it, they didn't expect that she was talking about this matter. Shangguan was also stunned. For a moment, she almost thought that she had heard wrong. What did you say? Chu Luiyue slowly repeated what she had just said. What third princess is unwilling? Do you know what you are saying? Jiang Yuqing finally reacted at this time. His face was covered in frost, and his brows were tightly knitted as he asked coldly. Back then, the crown princess passed away and everything was already concluded. Now you say that you want to reinvestigate. Could it be that you don't trust us? No matter how much he liked Chu Luiyue, he couldn't help it when he heard her say this. Small quarrels were harmless. Even if Chu Luiyue mocked and ridiculed Shangguan, he wouldn't mind too much. However, when it involved the empress concubine, he couldn't show any mercy. Chu Luiyue didn't seem to hear the threat in his words and nodded honestly. That's right, I just don't trust you. Jiang Yuqing suddenly choked. After a while he said, this matter is very important. How can we just let you say whatever you want? Isn't there the Tianling scepter? Chu Luiyue blinked and smiled. Could it be that the extremely noble Tianling scepter can't be exchanged for a chance to reinvestigate the crown princess's death? Chu Luiyue's words were too tricky. No one dared to say, no. The crown princess's status was indeed noble and her reputation was extremely high. But compared to the Tianling scepter, she was still inferior. If she dared to say anything bad about the Tianling scepter, wouldn't she be slandering Taizu? Jiang Yuqing could only change his words. It's not that you can't, but if you insist, you have to at least produce evidence to prove that there was a mistake back then. There is indeed a problem with the crown princess's death. Otherwise, we definitely won't agree to this matter. Back then they did it flawlessly and didn't leave behind any evidence. No matter why Chu Luiyue was suddenly involved in this matter, it was impossible to find any clues, let alone the truth of that year. However, when Chu Luiyue heard this, she nodded in an extremely relaxed manner. All right. As long as you agree to my conditions, I can produce evidence today. I hope that when the time comes, the third princess and prince consort won't go back on their words. Seeing Chu Luiyue's confident appearance, Jiang Yuqing's heart suddenly thumped and he felt a bit uneasy. Chu Luiyue definitely didn't have nothing better to do to make such a fuss in front of so many people. She was so determined. Could it be that this consort agrees to your conditions? Without waiting for him to refuse, Shangguanwan had already agreed. If you can pick up the Tianling scepter and obtain its approval, this consort will agree to let you investigate again. However, if you can't do it, then take your own life to atone for your crimes. Respect the Tianling scepter. How about it? Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Chu Luiyue only wanted to investigate the crown princess's death, but Shangguanwan was planning to kill Chu Luiyue. Chu Luiyue lifted her chin slightly and smiled slowly. Her gaze was as sharp as a blade. Alright. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 874. No one had expected things to develop to this stage. Chu Luiyue had actually gambled with her own life in exchange for a chance to investigate the crown princess's death. After a short silence, the crowd broke out into a commotion. Is Chu Luiyue crazy? What is she thinking? She's willing to pay any price to investigate the crown princess's death? Didn't she come from a small place outside Heaven's Canopy? How did she get involved with the crown princess? I can't figure it out. I really can't figure it out. In these 2 years there were also people who wanted to do this, but they all gave up in the end. Isn't she just finding trouble for herself? What can she do by herself? Aren't you all curious as to why Chu Luiyue dared to make such a claim? Looking at the Tianling scepter's attitude towards her, I think she might be able to do it. Since when was someone without the Tianling royal bloodline able to do such a thing? This was actually the question that everyone was most curious about. No matter how they thought about it, the Tianling scepter shouldn't have anything to do with Chu Luiyue, right? Jiang Yuqing also heard a lot of these whispers. He looked at Chu Luiyue and those familiar eyes, and an extremely absurd thought suddenly appeared in his mind. However, he immediately shook his head forcefully and dismissed the idea. Impossible. Shangguanyu had already been raped to death back then, and her soul had already dissipated. It was impossible for her to still be alive. At that time he had repeatedly confirmed that there was no mistake. But no matter how much he tried to convince himself, there was still a doubtful voice that didn't dissipate. If Chu Luiyue really had nothing to do with Shangguanyu, then why would she get involved in this matter? Also, the Tianling scepter didn't care about so many people, even Shangguanwan, a proper royal princess, but it treated Chu Luiyue differently. He finally could not help but look at Mu Qinghe, who was not far away, only to see that he was also looking at Chu Luiyue with a shocked and confused expression. As the deputy commander of the Black Cavalry, he was personally in charge of the security inside and outside the palace. Lang Kuan Hall was the most important, so he had always been guarding it. Jiang Yuqing frowned. Chu Luiyue was personally brought back by Mu Qinghe. When he first met Chu Luiyue, he was suspicious of her and asked Mu Qinghe to secretly investigate her. The result of the investigation was that there was no problem with Chu Luiyue's identity. She was indeed the abandoned daughter of a declining family that grew up in country Yaochen. By chance, she changed her fate and finally arrived at West Hill after going through many difficulties. But now, what was going on? Jiang Yuqing was getting more and more nervous. He felt that things were getting out of his control and were heading in an unknown direction. Even he was not sure what would happen in the end. However, at this moment, Jiang Yuqing was not the only one who was shocked. Mu Qinghe stared at Chu Luiyue, who was not far away. When he heard her words, he was also shocked. She wants to investigate the death of the princess. Who exactly is she? At this moment, Hong Yao also flew out. Looking at its green wings, it seemed to be a little agitated, and its pair of round eyes stared closely at Chu Luiyue on the other side. It was unknown if it was waiting or hoping for something. A thought suddenly popped up in Mu Qinghe's mind, and his body stiffened. His lips moved slightly as he called Hong Yao back. Hong Yao. Hearing that something was wrong with his voice, Hong Yao finally turned around to take a look. There seemed to be endless undercurrents surging in Mu Qinghe's eyes. Who is she? Everyone's gaze was focused on Chu Luiyue at this point. She lowered her head and glanced at the Tianling scepter. She didn't want to be so ostentatious, but since it gave her so much face, then there was no need to be polite. Thinking of this, Chu Liyue's gaze focused, and she reached out to the dragon head carved at the top. Actually, the Tianling scepter was right beside her, within reach. Therefore, Chu Liyue only moved her arm, and her fingers were already on the Tianling scepter. Everyone subconsciously held their breaths and were extremely nervous as they stared intently. But the expected resistance and rejection did not happen. The moment Chu Liyue's hand officially held the Tianling scepter, a buzzing sound rang out. At the same time, the sparkling radiance on it quickly gathered and finally gathered at the eyes of the dragon head. Swoosh! The dragon's tightly shut eyes suddenly opened. A golden ray of light shot out from within. It shot straight into the clouds. In an instant, the light shone brightly. It illuminated the world. The sacred light scattered and enveloped Chu Liyue. The wind whistled and her clothes fluttered. Her black hair fluttered. At a glance, it was incomparably noble. At this moment, Chu Liyue only felt that the force in her body seemed to have been guided by something, and it quickly surged. It was almost boiling. It was as if something that originally belonged to her had finally returned. It was a perfect fit. Almost instinctively, she held the scepter and raised it high. In the sky, clouds quickly gathered. With the golden light from the Tianling scepter as the center, a huge storm quickly gathered. It covered the sky and covered the sun. It was majestic. The next moment, Chu Liyue waved her wrist lightly. A majestic aura, wrapped in a biting cold murderous intent, rushed straight toward Shangguan. Shangguan was shocked and immediately wanted to retreat. But how could her speed compare to the attack of the Tianling scepter? Boom! That terrifying power flew past her left shoulder, instantly slicing off a large piece of flesh on her shoulder. Ah! Shangguan cried out in shock and flew backward, then fell hard onto the ground. She suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Her back and left shoulder were in pain, and a few of her ribs seemed to have been broken. Her internal organs felt like they were squeezed into a ball, and it was so uncomfortable that it felt like it was going to explode. She struggled to get up, full of resentment. Just as she was about to scold Chu Liyue, she suddenly heard a cold gasp from the crowd. Shangguan immediately felt that something was wrong. Looking at the crowd, she instantly saw countless pairs of frightened and disgusted eyes. They were looking at her. Shangguan suddenly realized that something was wrong, and only then did she realize that her face was burning with pain. She knew that something was wrong and immediately touched her face. It was rough and sticky to the touch, and it was extremely terrifying. Her mask had actually fallen off. Digression will continue tomorrow. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 875. Shangguan's heart was instantly filled with endless panic and fear. She screamed and immediately covered her face with her hands. However, everyone had already seen it clearly while she was in a daze. That originally beautiful face had suddenly become extremely ugly with scars all over it. From afar, it looked like centipedes were covering her face. It was frightening. The surrounding crowd instantly fell into a strange silence. Many people looked at each other in confusion. It was no wonder that the third princess had refused to leave Huayang Palace after returning from Dahuang Swamp. After a long time, more and more people came to see her, and the matters that she had to deal with personally became more and more troublesome. Only then did she begin to see people again. However, under most circumstances, she still wouldn't leave the palace. Everyone thought that she had really gotten injured because of His Majesty and needed to rest in bed. However, they didn't know that this was the reason behind it. Her appearance had been completely ruined. Feeling countless gazes on her, Shangguan was filled with hatred, anger, and resentment. Even though she had already gotten the divine beast blood from Chu Liyue and the injuries on her face had started to improve, she hadn't fully recovered yet because she had just applied the medicine. The deep and shallow scars were much better than when her face was constantly festering, but in the eyes of the crowd, they were still extremely terrifying. Shangguan trembled all over. She wanted nothing more than to disappear from this place immediately. The surroundings were extremely quiet, but it made her feel extremely tormented. Your Highness. When Chani, who was standing behind, saw the situation, she was the first to react. She hurriedly rushed forward, wanting to help Shangguan up. Get lost. Shangguan pushed Chani away. At this moment, everyone was just laughing at her. She simply struggled to stand up. From the corner of her eye, she saw the tattered mask that had fallen to the ground. However, it was only a thin layer. It was stained with dust and blood and looked extremely dirty. It was as if her face had been torn off and trampled on. She slowly raised her head and looked at Chu Luiyue. Her eyes were filled with hatred, as if she wanted nothing more than to eat his flesh and drink his blood. You did it on purpose. Sheng Wanwan's every word seemed to be squeezed out from the gaps between her teeth, carrying a deep anger and resentment. There were only a few people who knew that her looks had been disfigured. Chu Luiyue had obviously done this to embarrass her in front of everyone. Chu Luiyue looked at her with an apologetic expression. Third princess, I'm really sorry. My hand slipped just now. Are you all right? And slipped. Once. Sheng Wanwan was so angry that she almost laughed. She had really underestimated Chu Luiyue. He could even make up such a reason. Chu Luiyue held the Tianling scepter in her hand. There were so many people present, so why did it hit her? Furthermore, he had even removed her mask. If he didn't do it on purpose, Sheng Wanwan wouldn't believe it even if she was beaten to death. You bitch. What? Just as Sheng Wanwan was about to scold him, Jiang Yuqing, who was beside her, immediately spoke up and forcefully interrupted her. He walked over with a solemn face. You're injured. It's better to have your injuries checked first. Leave the rest to me. Sheng Wanwan was already mad with anger. If she was allowed to continue, who knew what would happen? Magistrate Zhuo. He shouted at Zhuo Mingxi. Zhuo Mingxi hurried forward. I'll leave third princess's injuries to you. Yes. Zhuo Mingxi responded and took out a pill. Your Highness, please take this medicine first. Looking at her, not to mention her external injuries, her internal injuries were also quite serious. You! Sheng Wanwan was about to shake off Jiang Yuqing's hand when she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her body. Her face suddenly paled and cold sweat dripped down with a schwa sound. Jiang Yuqing took the medicine. Take the medicine first. Sheng Wanwan raised her head with difficulty and glanced at him. There wasn't the slightest bit of heartache in his eyes. There was only coldness and indifference as well as a hint of warning. That was a warning to her not to cause trouble at this time. Sheng Wanwan's heart suddenly felt sour. Although she already knew that he didn't have any feelings for her, she was injured at this time. Her scars were exposed in front of so many people. She had no face left. He still wasn't moved in the slightest. Ever since she made a scene with him yesterday, he wasn't even willing to act anymore. He wasn't the least bit worried that she would be mocked and ridiculed after today. The despair in Sheng Wanwan's heart surged like a tide and gradually drowned her. Jiang Yuqing fed her the pill. She opened her mouth mechanically and swallowed it. Then, under Jiang Yuqing's signal, Chani and Zhuo Mingxi stepped forward to check her injuries. After taking her pulse, Zhuo Mingxi was shocked. There seemed to be two forces crazily fighting inside Sheng Wanwan's body. If it wasn't resolved quickly, it would be dangerous. Your Highness, your injuries are more serious. Why don't you go and treat them first? Zhuo Mingxi said carefully. Sheng Wanwan directly refused. She gritted her teeth and stared at Chu Luiyue. This consort isn't leaving. Today was her wedding day and also the day of her coronation ceremony. She was the main character today. Why should she leave? The coronation ceremony hadn't even started yet. Why should she leave? She wanted to see what kind of waves Chu Luiyue could stir up today. Zhuo Mingxi looked at Jiang Yuqing for help. Jiang Yuqing didn't force her. It was fine as long as Sheng Wanwan knew how powerful she was. If she really left, the situation today would be even worse. He nodded. Take good care of the third princess. With that, he turned around and looked at Chu Luiyue. His face no longer had the gentle smile from the beginning of the wedding. Now it was cold and there was even some anger in his eyes. Chu Luiyue, do you know what kind of crime it is to intentionally hurt the third princess? Even he thought that Chu Luiyue's attack just now was intentional. Chu Luiyue sighed softly and glanced at the Tianling scepter in her hand. At this time, the golden pillar of light that pierced through the clouds had gradually dissipated. Only the pair of dragon eyes were still shining with a resplendent light. They were bright, dazzling, and full of power. How could she explain so that they would believe that she really didn't do it on purpose just now, but that the Tianling scepter did it on its own? At that time, it was in the midst of awakening and its aura was erupting. Before she could react, it had already launched that attack at Sheng Wanwan. In her opinion, that attack was more like a warning than an attack. Otherwise, Sheng Wanwan's injuries wouldn't have stopped there. Thinking of this, she narrowed her eyes and looked at Sheng Wanwan. To be honest, it was the Heaven's Writ Scepter that made its move just now, said the Heaven's Writ Scepter. Chapter 876. You're spouting nonsense. When Shang Guanwan heard this, she immediately retorted. Why would the Tianling scepter do this for no reason? I'm of the Tianling royal family's bloodline. Even if someone had tried to pick up the Tianling scepter and failed, they had never heard of the Tianling scepter attacking anyone of its own accord. Chu Liyue's words were simply too laughable. That's right. With your status, what exactly did you do to provoke the Tianling scepter to do this? Chu Liyue smiled faintly and asked in return. If I remember correctly, when you tried to pick up the Tianling scepter just now, it seemed to have resisted you a little. Shang Guanwan was about to go on a crusade against Chu Liyue, but when she heard this, she instantly choked. The rest of her words were stuck in her throat. It was extremely uncomfortable, but she couldn't say it no matter what. She instantly felt guilty and her eyes darted around. Actually, she had also realized this problem. The Tianling scepter had been very rude to her from the start, and it had no intention of submitting to her. Later on, when she asked for help from the senior, it had directly exploded and sent her flying. Could it be because of this? She was in a fit of anger just now, so she didn't care and scolded it. But now, Chu Liyue's words made her uncertain again. If it was really because of this, she clenched her teeth and braced herself. I don't know what you're talking about. The surrounding people's expressions all became a little strange. Chu Liyue's words weren't without reason. From the moment Shang Guanwan tried to pick up the Tianling scepter, everything had been going wrong. Something didn't seem right. Even if she couldn't pick it up and didn't receive the Tianling scepter's acknowledgement, she shouldn't have been knocked down from the top and rolled down the 9 steps, right? Could it really be that there was something wrong with Shang Guanwan? Why? Don't try to absolve yourself of the blame. You clearly know this consort's face. Back then, this consort became like this because your demonic beast scratched me. Now that you're treating this consort like this in public, aren't you just trying to embarrass this consort? When Shang Guanwan saw that the situation was not right, she immediately changed the topic. She restrained the anger and resentment on her face and lowered her head to complain tearfully, as if she had been wronged. Chu Liyue sneered inwardly. She wanted to throw dirty water on her? That would depend on whether or not she was willing to accept it. Third princess, you've misunderstood me. When your face was scratched, I hadn't formed a contract with it yet. I really didn't do it on purpose. As for the trouble Dumpling caused previously, although it had nothing to do with me, I still felt very apologetic. After I came back, I went straight to the palace to offer the blood of the mythological beast to His Majesty and you. If I really wanted to make things difficult for you, why would I do this? Chu Liyue's tone was light and his expression was sincere. Shang Guanwan was so angry that her chest rose and fell violently. Her eyes widened and her chest rose and fell violently, but she couldn't say a single word. She had clearly taken the initiative to ask for the blood of the mythological beast, so how did it become her offering the treasure in Chu Liyue's mouth? Lies really came easily from his mouth. However, even though Shang Guanwan was extremely angry, she couldn't refute it. Could it be that she had to admit in public that she had forced Chu Liyue to take out the blood of the mythological beast? Seeing Shang Guanwan's guilty appearance, many people secretly despised her. Since it was a mistake made before the contract was formed, then this matter naturally had nothing to do with Chu Liyue. It was already very rare for her to be willing to take the initiative to help, but Shang Guanwan actually made a false accusation. It was obvious what kind of person she was. At this time, Jiang Yuqing finally spoke. Even so, it's a fact that you hurt the third princess. You should take responsibility for it. In front of everyone, he naturally had to stand on Shang Guanwan's side. Moreover, he wasn't sure of Chu Liyue's identity and didn't know what she was planning to do. Naturally, he was extremely vigilant. Chu Liyue glanced at the Tianling scepter. She really knew how to cause more trouble than she did. The Tianling scepter trembled imperceptibly. After this matter, I will naturally do what I have to do. But now the winner of this bet can be decided, right? As Chu Liyue spoke, she raised her arm and flipped her wrist. Swoosh. She held the Tianling scepter tightly in her hand and pointed the dragon's head directly at Jiang Yuqing. Jiang Yuqing's heart trembled. He didn't know why, but when he met those golden dragon eyes, he felt an inexplicable panic in his heart. It was as if everything about him had been seen through. He instinctively looked away and frowned. I have already picked up the Tianling scepter and obtained its approval. Chu Liyue's eyes narrowed dangerously. Her red lips parted slightly, but her eyes were cold. Can we start investigating the crown princess's death again? There was silence in front of the huge Langkuan palace. Chu Liyue held the Tianling scepter in her hand, and her dragon eyes shone brightly. Everyone understood that Chu Luiyue had indeed won this bet. When they heard her mention investigating the crown princess's death again, many people had complicated expressions. Who would have thought that this grand and solemn ceremony would end up like this? Almost everyone looked at Shangguan Wan and Jiang Yuqing. In front of everyone, they couldn't break the contract on the spot. This time they had to investigate. Jiang Yuqing stared intently at Chu Luiyue. After a long while he said, "All right. Since you have done it, then the third princess and I will naturally accept our loss." The crowd instantly became chaotic. This meant that he agreed. They really had to investigate the crown princess's death again. 2 years ago, everything happened too quickly, and there were indeed many suspicious points. But now they were finally going to investigate thoroughly? Do you think that there really was something fishy about the crown princess's death back then? The Tianling scepter felt that the crown princess had been wronged, so it allowed Chu Luiyue to succeed in exchange for this opportunity? It can't be. Wasn't it already decided at that time? Even the crown princess's trusted aides didn't make much of a fuss. If there really was a problem, would they let it go? Why not? The crown princess's trusted aides are now either dead or injured, especially the 13 Yu guards. They are still being hunted down and there are very few of them left. If you really want to say something, it can only be Mu Qinghe. I think so too. If not, there's really no way to explain how Chu Luiyue picked up the Tianling scepter. She's so persistent. Could it be that she was also one of the crown princess's people back then? Everyone discussed in low voices and all kinds of guesses appeared. Jiang Yuqing heard most of it and his heart was in a mess. He looked at Chu Luiyue and said in a low voice, "Put the Tianling scepter back into the black mystic stone first, and everything else can be discussed." After all, it was the sacred artifact of the Tianling dynasty. How could it be in Chu Luiyue's hands like this? Especially when there was a battered and exhausted Shangguan Wan beside him. The comparison was tragic. It was like a joke. Chu Luiyue raised her eyebrows slightly. Okay. Then she flicked her wrist. The Tianling scepter quickly flew out. However, not long after it flew out, the Tianling scepter suddenly changed direction and flew back, standing in front of Chu Luiyue again. The dragon head lightly tapped on the back of Chu Luiyue's hand, then shook and jumped as if it was asking for credit. Hee, I'm back. Did you miss me? The corner of Chu Luiyue's mouth twitched. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 877. How should she put it? In her previous life, she did not have the chance to wait until the day of her wedding. Naturally, she did not get to see the Tianling scepter. In Chu Luiyue's heart, the Tianling scepter had always been a very dignified and sacred existence. It was high up and could not be blasphemed. So today, when the Tianling scepter flew towards her, she was both surprised and happy. With the Tianling scepter in her hand, it seemed to make up for all the regrets she had in the past. But no one had ever told her that the Tianling scepter was so clingy. Looking at the Tianling scepter in front of her, which was so happy that it was waiting to be praised, even someone as strong as Chu Luiyue felt that she could not take it for a moment. If you are happy, why don't you consider me? There are so many people watching. Under normal circumstances, Chu Luiyue did not really care about other people's gazes. Only at this moment did he feel as though he was burning. Cough. Chu Luiyue clenched her fist and coughed. Then she stretched out her hand and pushed it. Well, I think you should go back. The Tianling scepter did not seem to hear her and continued to swing its head around. It did not seem to have any intention of going back. Swoosh. Something flashed in front of Chu Luiyue's eyes. Tuanzi suddenly flew out and faced the Tianling scepter as it widened its round eyes. I told you to go back. Why are you still here? The Tianling scepter paused and swayed in another position, circling around Chu Luiyue's hand. Why do you care? It is not a divine beast. Why are you jealous of it? Dumpling was confused. Chu Luiyue was speechless. One was a divine beast and the other was a sacred object. Either one of them would be envied. But why did she feel an inexplicable sense of embarrassment? Seeing that they were going to continue arguing, Chu Luiyue made a prompt decision. She grabbed Dumpling's wings and put it on her shoulder. However, as soon as he let go, Dumpling struggled and rushed out again. The Tianling scepter also jumped back and forth as if it was provoking him. Chu Luiyue held his forehead helplessly. Finally, he couldn't help but shout, "Don't make a fuss." It was finally quiet. The Tianling scepter obediently stood to the side, and Dumpling once again nestled on Chu Luiyue's shoulder. Chu Luiyue heaved a long sigh of relief and looked at Jiang Yuqing. Well, I've already tried my best. I really can't do anything about this kind of thing. Jiang Yuqing's expression was very strange. It couldn't be helped. No one would be able to remain calm after witnessing such a scene. However, Jiang Yuqing was someone who had seen a lot. He quickly calmed down. Seeing that the Tianling scepter was really sticking to Chu Luiyue and refusing to leave, Shangguan would only lose more face if they continued to dwell on this issue. The best way was to ignore it for now. Therefore, Jiang Yuqing directly changed the topic. Let's not talk about this matter for now. As for what you said just now, we will send a small team to investigate again. No need. Chu Luiyue chuckled and interrupted Jiang Yuqing. That would be too troublesome. Let's just start here. Well, what? Jiang Yuqing was also stunned for a moment. For a moment he didn't know what Chu Luiyue meant. Even Shangguan could not help but open her mouth again and scold him coldly. Start here? How can that be? Chu Luiyue, get it straight. This is Longquan Palace. How can you be so presumptuous here? Not only did you rely on the Tianling scepter to steal the limelight, you actually want to start investigating Shangguan Yu's death here? You're thinking too much. Jiang Yuqing also frowned. After all, today is the day of my wedding with the third princess. Even if Jiang Yuqing didn't care much about Shangguan, he still attached great importance to this wedding. Shangguan's side had already caused enough trouble. If Shangguan Yu's death was also brought up, it would really be a mess. Upon hearing Jiang Yuqing's words, Shangguan's face also carried a hint of resentment. Chu Luiyue, you insist on doing this. Could it be that you don't want to see this consort happy? On this consort's wedding day, you deliberately brought up this consort. Are you sincerely cursing this consort? Chu Luiyue widened his eyes in confusion. Third princess, where did this come from? Didn't you always say that the crown princess is the elder sister that you respect the most? Why do you feel that mentioning her today is a curse to you? Shangguan immediately choked and was speechless. Chu Luiyue chuckled. Her Highness the Crown Princess has always doted on you. If she knew that you were getting married to the prince consort today, I'm sure that she would be happy for you. Don't you think so? Shangguan suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. It went straight to the top of her head. Enough. She rudely interrupted Chu Luiyue's words. Just do whatever you want to do. At that time, Shangguan Yu was already dead, and all the evidence and clues were basically destroyed. There was no way to investigate at all. She didn't believe that these people would be able to find anything 2 years later. Jiang Yuqing subconsciously wanted to stop her, but Shangguan had already spoken. He slowly clenched his fists in his sleeves. For some reason he felt an inexplicable panic in his heart. Many thanks for third princess's understanding. Chu Luiyue smiled in response, then took a step forward. Everyone looked over with different expressions on their faces. Chu Luiyue looked straight at Jiang Yuqing. The smile on her face gradually faded, and there seemed to be a cold glint in her eyes. Back then, the crown princess's funeral was jointly managed by the third princess and the prince consort. Then, the two of you are the ones who know the most about everything, right? Jiang Yuqing didn't know what she was going to do, but he still nodded. That's right. At that time he was still a low-level fiancé, and Shangguan was the only one who was slightly older among the heirs of the imperial family. Naturally, the two of them were in charge. Everyone was aware of this. That's good. I have a few questions that I want to ask the two of you first. Chu Luiyue raised a finger. First, when something happened to the crown princess, it was you who discovered it first, right? Yes. Jiang Yuqing answered without hesitation. These questions had already been asked by countless people. He, Shangguan, and the others had already made up a set of excuses. Even if Chu Luiyue asked him 100 times in public, he would still say the same thing. That day the crown princess said that she wanted to cultivate and try to break through to the 9th stage, so she chose to go into seclusion. But not long after, I noticed that something was wrong. When I barged in, I found that the crown princess was already dying. Jiang Yuqing spoke very smoothly and calmly, as if the scene that day was really like that. Chu Luiyue raised a second finger. All right. Second question. Why didn't the crown princess cultivate earlier or later? Why did she have to try to break through to the 9th stage on such an important day before the wedding? All cultivators know that breaking through is risky, and the higher the level, the longer it takes to break through. Could it be that she doesn't want to participate in the wedding the next day? Chapter 878. Jiang Yuqing was still able to respond easily. No one knew what the empress concubine was thinking. But everyone knew that apart from the wedding, the next day was also her ascension ceremony. Perhaps she did this to pick up the Tianling scepter and stand on it in a better posture. Moreover, she had a Tianjing Yuan meridian. Breaking through to rank 9 might be unattainable for ordinary cultivators. But for her it might be much easier. These words were not without reason. Not long after the Empress concubine was born, she was tested to have a Tianjing Yuan meridian. Since then she had been the top genius of the entire Tianling dynasty. Whether it was martial cultivation, Shen master or celestial physician, she was extremely talented. It wasn't strange for her to have such thoughts. Chu Liwei nodded thoughtfully and then asked, "Why are you here?" In that case, why didn't the Empress concubine go to the ancestral hall if she planned to focus on breaking through? I remember that the ancestral hall of the Tianling royal family was also destroyed because of this, right? As the heir to the Tianling throne, what's wrong with going to the ancestral hall? Jiang Yuqing asked. Of course there's nothing wrong with it. According to this, the Empress concubine was in the ancestral hall the entire day before yesterday? And eldest young master Jiang, you were guarding outside the entire time? Of course. The people who served her that day can testify to this. Jiang Yuqing had already answered these questions countless times, so he was completely at ease. His brows gradually furrowed as he looked at Chu Liwei and said coldly, "If the reinvestigation you're talking about is asking these questions again in front of everyone, then let me tell you, this is meaningless. If you really have doubts about what happened back then, you have to produce evidence. Otherwise there's no need to continue. I haven't finished asking yet." Chu Liwei smiled and suddenly looked at Yuqi Song. "Master, you should also have some questions to ask eldest young Master Jiang, right?" Hearing this, everyone turned to look at Wei Qi Song. Wei Qi Song nodded, looked at Jiang Yuqing and said in a deep voice, "Previously this old man had made a trip to Thousand View Gardens zither room to retrieve some of the items I had left there. However, there was something wrong with Empress Concubine's Phoenix Tail zither." Hearing the words Phoenix Tail zither, Jiang Yuqing's heart suddenly sank. Everyone knows that the Empress concubine loved that zither very much when she was alive. However, this old man discovered that the Empress concubine had left a Xian formation on it. Wei Qi Song stared intently at Jiang Yuqing and enunciated every word clearly. "Although this old man isn't a top-notch mystic cultivator, I have dabbled in this aspect. The Xian formation that the Empress concubine had engraved on the zither was only a level 3 Xian formation. But the important thing was that the name of the Xian formation was Dragon Trapping Formation. If there really isn't any problem, then why did Princess leave such a profound formation on the zither that she likes so much? In this old man's opinion, the level and power of that Xian formation are not worth mentioning, but the name of that Xian formation is very meaningful. Dragon Trapping Formation. When a dragon is trapped, it seeks help from the outside. The Empress concubine had clearly encountered danger, so she left this Xian formation, hinting that she had been harmed by a traitor. Once this was said, everyone was shocked. If what Yuqi Song said was true, then there really was a big problem with this matter. One had to know that the Empress concubine had outstanding talent in this aspect since she was young. It was absolutely impossible for her to leave a mere level 3 Xian formation on such a precious item. Yuqi Song's explanation was the only reasonable answer. Jiang Yuqing was greatly alarmed and clenched his fists tightly. He had been careless. He had been in charge of the zither room for 2 years, but he had never discovered that there was such a hint on the zither. At that time it was in the zither room. After Shang Guanyu finished playing a song, he brought the last cup of tea to Shang Guanyu, luring her poison to act up. After that, she quickly realized that something was wrong and wanted to resist. But at that time she was already no match for Jiang Yuqing. In the end, he secretly brought her back to the palace and locked her in the imperial family's ancestral hall. At that time, he had always thought that everything had progressed smoothly. But now that he thought about it, she had indeed struggled and stayed by the zither for quite a long time. Could it be that the Xian formation was left behind at that time? Jiang Yuqing tried his best to calm himself down and said with a cold expression, "Pavilion Master Yuqi, you have to pay attention to evidence when you speak. The evidence is on the Phoenix Tail zither." Yuqi Song immediately said, "You have always been in charge of the zither room. As long as you send someone to retrieve the Phoenix Tail zither, we will know at a glance." When everyone heard this, they felt that it was very reasonable and all looked at Jiang Yuqing. Jiang Yuqing pursed his lips. At this moment, he finally understood that the secret Yuqi Song had discovered in the zither room that day was actually this. No wonder his attitude changed so much after that. It turned out that he was already certain that someone had harmed Shang Guanyu. As one of the closest people to Shangguan Yu and the one who accompanied Shanghai Yu to the zither room the most, his suspicions were naturally the greatest. The phoenix tail zither was lost some time ago. Jiang Yuqing took a deep breath and said. At this moment, he was incomparably glad that the zither was gone. Otherwise, if the evidence was verified and it was as Wei Qi-song had said, there was no way he could clear his name. Everyone was in an uproar. Lost. How could such an important thing be lost? Hasn't Jiang Yuqing always been in charge of the zither room? How could it be lost for no reason? Isn't this too much of a coincidence? Low voices of doubt could be heard from the crowd. Jiang Yuqing was also somewhat embarrassed. But at this moment this was undoubtedly the best excuse. It was my incompetence that led to the loss of the phoenix tail zither. I've been sending people to secretly search for it, but there hasn't been any progress. I'm afraid that this lead will be cut off for the time being. Jiang Yuqing looked a little ashamed, but his eyes were very resolute. Without the zither, there's no way to prove whether what Pavilion Master Yuqi said was true or false. Pavilion Master Yuqi, it's not that I don't trust you, but this is a serious matter. Without concrete evidence, I don't dare to say anything. Yuqi-song asked in return. In other words, you'll only admit to my words if we find the phoenix tail zither? Jiang Yuqing paused. Yes. Without the phoenix tail zither, everything that happened today would not have been able to continue. Everything would have been empty talk. Many people looked disappointed. They thought that they had finally found some clues, but they didn't expect it to be gone just like that. If the crown princess was really harmed, then the longer this dragged on, the harder it would be to find out the truth. At this moment, Yuqi-song suddenly said, "What a coincidence! What a coincidence! Yesterday someone delivered a gift to this old man." Jiang Yuqing suddenly looked up. Then he saw Yuqi-song wave his sleeve, and a zither appeared in front of him. It was the phoenix tail zither. It's just right here. Why don't we take a look at it ourselves? Digression. The 5th chapter is about to be updated. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from love. Chapter 879. The expression on Jiang Yuqing's face finally cracked, and he cried out in shock. Why is this thing with you? Could it be that the person who secretly broke into the zither room and stole this phoenix tail zither was Yuqi-song? That person's aura was hidden extremely well. He had never thought that it would be related to Yuqi-song. Didn't this old man say just now? This is a big gift sent by someone yesterday. Yuqi-song stroked his beard and showed the phoenix tail zither to everyone. Everyone can take a look and see if this is the zither that the Empress concubine had back then. Everyone looked at each other and fell silent for a moment. Eldest young Master Jiang should be the most familiar with this thing. Why don't you check it out? Otherwise, someone will say that this old man took a fake thing and created a rumor out of thin air here. As Yuqi-song spoke, he even pushed it forward. Jiang Yuqing was standing 10 steps away. With his eyesight, from the moment he saw this thing, he had already confirmed that this was indeed the one that was lost in the zither room. However, he really couldn't figure out why this thing would be with Yuqi-song. He said that someone sent it yesterday. Who was that person? Let me take a look. In the quiet and strange atmosphere, a person walked out. It was Yuan Wei. He walked over with a smile. Back then, Her Highness the Empress concubine liked this zither very much and specially asked me to prepare many matching items. Therefore, I am quite familiar with this thing. I will identify it. Everyone should trust me, right? Yuqi-song handed the item over. Please. Although Yuan Wei's position wasn't comparable to the 3 dukes, his status was also very noble because his family had been passed down for thousands of years. His words carried a lot of weight. Yuan Wei carefully took the phoenix tail zither and looked around carefully. His expression gradually became serious. After a moment he nodded. This is indeed the Empress concubine's item. Moreover, there is indeed a dragon trapping array inside this zither. Let me take a look too. Jian Shai finally couldn't help but come over and take a look. There seemed to be a glimmer of light flickering on the phoenix-tailed zither. Flipping it over, one could see that there was indeed a palm-sized Shen formation at the bottom, and it was shining brightly. Jiang Yuqing's mind was in chaos. Back then he had only been focused on dealing with the Shangguan Yu and hadn't paid much attention to the phoenix tail zither. In the past 2 years he had rubbed the rosin on the phoenix tail zither countless times, but he had never noticed this. Thinking of this, he immediately said, "This Shen formation didn't exist before. I've never seen a Shen formation like this before. It was only a level 3 Shen formation, and any Shen master could carve it on it." Pavilion Master Yuchi, even if you suspect that there's a problem with the princess's death, there's no need to use such methods to deceive everyone, right? Wei Qi-song laughed coldly when he heard this. Of course you didn't see it before because there was a seal on the Shen formation. It was only after this old man broke the seal that this profound formation was revealed. Jiang Yuqing froze on the spot. What seal? He actually knew nothing about this. This is indeed the dragon trapping array. And this aura is indeed from the princess's hands. Jian Shai nodded affirmatively. Because the material of this phoenix tail zither is extremely precious and special, ordinary people can't leave any traces on it. Although this Shen formation is only a level 3 Shen formation, the person who can do this is definitely a top-notch Shen master. If I'm not wrong, the princess should have used the power of her Tianjing Yuan meridian to seal this Shen formation and conceal its aura. Yuchi Song stroked his beard. That's right. This old man only saw this dragon trapping array after breaking the seal. Sheng Guanyu's strength had already reached level 8 Shen master back then. If she wanted to hide something, it definitely wouldn't be a difficult matter. Jiang Yuqing's heart kept sinking, and his entire body turned ice cold. He had overlooked it. He had truly overlooked it. He had actually forgotten that he wasn't Sheng Guanyu's opponent at all, which was why he couldn't even see through her methods. And now, all of this had become conclusive evidence. After that, a few more people came forward to take a look. They all nodded and confirmed that this was indeed left behind by the princess back then. Because she had a Tianjing Yuan meridian, her aura was very easy to recognize. Anyone with some status in the Tianling dynasty would be able to confirm it with just one look. What's this? As Jian Shai spoke, he suddenly saw that there seemed to be something under the Shen formation. He moved closer and his expression changed slightly. There's a word of blood on it. Everyone was shocked when they heard this. If nothing really happened, why would there be a word of blood on the phoenix tail zither? Moreover, she used such complicated methods to conceal it. Jiang Yuqing's heart thumped violently. It almost jumped out of his chest. All the blood in his body seemed to freeze at this moment. No. Everything happened very quickly back then. Sheng Guanyu couldn't possibly have the time and energy to do all this. Jiang Yuqing kept admonishing himself, but there was still a voice in the depths of his heart that kept ringing. Why not? She was smart and quick-witted. Was there anything she couldn't do? This word of blood was also left behind by the princess. Jian Shai's expression had completely turned cold. Yuan Wei and the others who were standing nearby also had a change in expression. Naturally, they recognized him as well. What's the word of blood on it? Someone couldn't wait to ask. Yuchi Song laughed, but there was no smile in his eyes. Jiang Yuqing, you should know what the word of blood on it says, right? Jiang Yuqing's temples throbbed. I don't, Jiang. Jian Shai suddenly raised the phoenix tail zither and shouted sternly. The word of Jiang is on it. Jiang Yuqing, isn't this your Jiang? Digression, Tianling scepter, I heard that someone said that I'm a clown? February, yes. They're all talking about you. Tianling scepter, angry. February, yes. So I won't add more chapters for them. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 880. His voice was like thunder as it fell heavily. In an instant, everyone was shocked on the spot. The bloody words hidden on the phoenix tail guqin were actually Jiang? Anyone with a brain could guess that the Empress concubine had used such a complicated method to leave this secret signal on the phoenix tail guqin. There was definitely a hidden meaning. Dragon trapping array bloody words Jiang, isn't this implying that Jiang Yuqing is the one who harmed me? There was dead silence in front of Lang Kuan Hall. Jiang Yuqing's ears were ringing. Jian Shai's stern questioning was like a heavy punch, catching him off guard and completely stupefied on the spot. He thought that everything back then was flawless and that no one would be able to find any clues. But he never expected that Sheng Guanyu had actually left a trick up her sleeve. There was actually such a shocking secret hidden on the phoenix tail guqin. Everyone's gazes converged on him. Suspicion, shock, anger, all kinds of gazes enveloped Jiang Yuqing like flames. Even his entire body felt like it was burning up. A sense of crisis that he had never felt before welled up in his heart. Jiang Yuqing had never been as embarrassed as he was now. He tried his best to calm himself down and tried to make his voice sound calm. The word Jiang doesn't mean anything. Not to mention the Tianling dynasty, there are countless people with the surname Jiang in Xiling City alone. Why are you so sure that it's me at first glance? What if this word doesn't refer to my surname, but something else? Jian Shai was so angry that he laughed. Jiang Yuqing, don't play dumb here. There are many people with the surname Jiang, but I'm afraid there aren't many who can be remembered by the Empress concubine, right? If she wasn't forced into a desperate situation, the Empress concubine definitely wouldn't have left such a hint. In other words, it's very likely that something happened to her in the zither room. And you, aren't you the one who usually accompanies her in the zither room? Do you really not know anything about this? Jiang Yuqing's eyes flickered. Mountain Lord Jian's words aren't without reason. But this matter indeed has nothing to do with me. Back then, the Empress concubine and I were in love, and we were about to get married. What reason do I have to harm her? You'll have to ask yourself. Wei Qi Song suddenly interjected, his voice flat and indifferent. Didn't you also get together with the third princess in less than 2 years after the Empress concubine left? You even got married? Well said. As soon as Yu Qi Song finished speaking, another powerful voice came from the other side. It was none other than Meng Jingji, who had been extremely dissatisfied with this marriage from the very beginning. Even if I don't ask you to be the Empress concubine and never marry again, you should at least show some sincerity, right? In the end, right after you finished the princess funeral, you were together with the third princess. You still have the face to say that you were in love? Hey, if this was the Western frontier, someone like you wouldn't be considered a man. Even women wouldn't take a fancy to you. Jiang Yuqing and Shang Guanwan were together. Their relationship was fake, but their identity was real. If Shang Guanwan didn't have such a status, why would Jiang Yuqing even spare her a glance? Although Meng Jingji was stationed at the Western frontier all year round and didn't return to the Western Tomb often, this didn't mean that he knew nothing about the Western Tomb. He was a military general, but he also had good eyesight. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to sit in this position for dozens of years. Back then, even Mu Qinghe couldn't replace him when she led troops to quell the rebellion in the Great Desolate Swamp. This person's ability could be seen at a glance. Jiang Yuqing's face instantly darkened. Shang Guanwan was still shocked and worried about the phoenix tail zither, but in the next moment she heard that she was also being scolded. She was so angry that her face turned white. But when she glanced at Meng Jingji, she forcefully swallowed back those unpleasant words. This person was a tough nut to crack. Today's troubles were already enough. If she provoked Meng Jingji, it would be like adding oil to the fire. Jiang Yuqing remained unmoved. He only said indifferently, "My marriage with Wan'er has nothing to do with this. Even if there's really something fishy about the princess's death, everyone shouldn't be able to pin the crime on me just based on the word blood, right?" He planned to insist on this point. It's true that the word Jiang was written on it, and it's also true that he was one of the closest people to the princess back then. Anyone who saw this would inevitably make the connection. But as long as they couldn't produce any other evidence, he still had some leeway. That's right. You have no evidence. My Jiang family won't let you off just because you're slandering Yuqing. We'll be at your mercy. Jiang Lizhua stood out and hollered in a low voice. This old man wants to see who it is that wants to drag my Jiang family down with him. How dare you pour this basin of dirty water on my son? Jiang Lizhua was a grand tutor after all, and his status was very high. In addition, Jiang Yuqing was now married to the third princess, so the entire Jiang family's status had risen by another level. Ordinary people really couldn't afford to offend the Jiang family. However, Yu Qi Song suddenly laughed. Everyone will eventually find out who this basin of dirty water belongs to. Since you want evidence, I'll give it to you. Jiang Yuqing's brows twitched harshly. Seeing Yu Qi Song's confident look, does he really have any evidence? Yu Qi Song stared at him and slowly said, I watched the princess grow up with me. I'm indebted to the princess's love for me, and she treats me as half a master. Ever since the princess's death, my Chongshu pavilion has also suffered continuous attacks. The pavilion's elders and disciples have all been beaten up, and there aren't many people left. It's almost impossible for the mountain gate to hold on. The reason for all of this is actually just that I want to investigate the princess's death. Yu Qi Song's expression gradually turned solemn and cold, and even the surrounding space seemed to freeze along with it. It's not just my Chongshu pavilion. In the past 2 years, there have been many people who want to investigate the truth behind the princess's death. However, these people have either died or been injured, and some have even quietly disappeared, never to appear again. It's as if someone is deliberately obstructing them by hook or by crook. Everyone should be aware of this. In this world, the one who doesn't want the truth of that matter to be exposed the most is most likely the person who harmed the princess. A few people inwardly nodded. Although no one had said this on the surface, everyone knew in their hearts. Jiang Lizuo was so angry that he laughed. What, Yuchi-song, do you mean that the one who secretly killed your Chongshu pavilion is my son? Jiang Yuqing also frowned. Pavilion Master Yuchi, I've already personally sent Qi Dai to you. It's true that he used Chaos Yuan gravel on the Chongshu pavilion, but I truly didn't know about this matter before. Whether it's true or not, let him come over and we'll know when we confront him. Yuchi-song said indifferently. Jiang Yuqing felt that this was extremely absurd and couldn't help but say, you know that Qi Dai is already delirious, so how can you confront him? Oh, you're talking about this. Yuchi-song suddenly laughed. This old man has already cured him. A better reading experience came from the Love Network. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.